Ready?
Advice, family.
Almighty God, we offer our prayers to you and seek your protection for everyone in our blessed country. We pray, O God, for you to protect us from harm and sickness, so that we may have the strength to look after one another. O merciful Lord, we pray that you will continue to bless our land and those who cultivate our crops, so that there may always be food. We pray that no one will ever go hungry. Grant us understanding, equal vision, and balanced minds. Guide us along a path of faith, devotion, and wisdom. Help us to recognize that each of us is equal, that we are all equal in humanity. Give us your protection so that we may live in safety together and grow strong and free together. We pray that everyone will find love and peace in their daily lives. Dear God, we pray for our political leader. We pray for members of this team. Protect them, God, and give them the strength and courage to continue their service to our nation without fear or favor. Thank you, God, for keeping your children free in our democratic state, where every creed and race finds an equal place. Dear God, we beseech you to bless our leaders, bless our people, and bless our country.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the pre-budget discussions 2020-2021 National Budget of Trinidad and Tobago from the offices of the Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, Dr. Rudal Munilal, in Debe, South Trinidad. Thank you very much for joining us on the Facebook page of Dr. Munilal. We urge you to share the broadcast and to welcome as many people to what is going to be a tremendous discussion on the issues of the day as it pertains to 2020-2021 budget to be presented on Monday. First, we thank Bishop Janki Ragunanan for the invocation. We have a distinguished panel made up of tremendous policymakers and managers in the public and private sector to discuss the issues of the day. We thank you again very much for being with us, and we promise you lively and spirited discussions on the issues of the day. Before we get to that, I just would like to join with our host, Member of Parliament, Dr. Munilal, the panelists, and you, or everyone in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, in paying tribute to a fallen hero. Just quite briefly, I know the other panelists will join in expressing condolences on the death, the very sad death of a national treasure and icon, Dennis Prangalang Hall. We've lost someone who understood the Caribbean society in a way few others did. And you would have seen various expressions, including from one of our panelists already on social media, Dr. Gopi Singh. We join in paying tribute to an outstanding national of Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and the Caribbean diaspora. We thank you again for being with us. We have some lively discussions because we have a high-powered panel, all on social media. We have a limited audience here at the offices of Dr. Munilal, and everyone is adhering to COVID-19 hygienic rules. We hope you are doing that too. We thank you again. We urge you through the course of the session and the event to share the broadcast, in addition to which we urge you to file your questions through Zoom. And there would be a question and answer period in which the relevant panelists will take your questions. So throughout the broadcast, feel free to file a question. We'll keep reminding you of that. There is, you know that better than me, the raise hand concept on social media. Do that, file your questions, and we'd ask the relevant panelists to address the question as we go on. We thank you again for being with us on this Saturday, the day before, the weekend before the national budget. As I said, a very distinguished panel made up of experienced, knowledgeable experts in various disciplines in both the public and private sector. We start the baton going with someone who has been in cricket administration, but he has been in much more than that. He has been in public policy. He has been part of the solution on a number of things, including the national flooding nightmare that we have, that some people saying we should simply adapt to. Dr. Alan Sami is a national figure. He has been for several terms now the chairman of the Penal Debe Regional Corporation. He's been a representative of the people at various levels, and as you know, those of you who have been following the national pastime of cricket, he has been in administration. He is one of the most knowledgeable people in the field of local government and in governance generally. He is going to be our first panelist, and while I am at that, I want to introduce the other panelist. Former Senator Tahaka Obika is an expert in the economy. He's an economist. He has served in the upper house of Trinidad and Tobago. He has presented himself to the national electorate. He has studied abroad. He's a distinguished scholar and an eminent economist, and we're very happy to have him here also. Up the Caribbean, we have a Caribbean perspective in this. Dr. Claudius Prevel is a Caribbean intellectual. In fact, he's a giant, intellectual giant. He is going to be with us through social media. He is a trade expert for the Caribbean, has been associated with several trade groupings, including FTAA, the World Trade Organizations, and several hemispheric groups. He's an expert, and I, for one, and I'm sure you too, are very anxious to hear his perspectives on trade, on the economy, and so on, especially in these dire times of COVID-19. So we have Dr. Claudius Prevel as a member of our audience, and we thank him very much for making himself available on this Saturday afternoon from his homeland of St. Lucia. Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, there are not many people in the Caribbean when you say needs no introduction, but he really needs no introduction. And I think he has moved, as he has done for several years now, from being just a practicing politician to a statesman. I once tried to lift a copy of his CV, and it almost forever strained my arms. That is Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, a most distinguished medical practitioner, a surgeon, an intellectual, a professor at the university, and as it says, I could go on and on. We are truly honored that we have Dr. Gopi Singh here, who continues to discuss the issues of the day, even outside of the realm of the Parliament, and we thank him very much. He has had a statement in the public media over the past few days on the issue of health. And while on that, just permit me a few seconds to join with everyone else in paying tribute and mourning the loss of Shirin Samuel, the employee, bright, young, 34-year-old employee of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And we, as with everyone else, mourn her loss. And Dr. Gopi Singh had a tremendous statement on that, in which he is calling for reform of the public health administration setup. I imagine he will speak about that. And then the host member of Parliament, Dr. Rudal Munilal, has had experience in government, a senior minister of government, served as acting prime minister, has been in opposition politics. He is one of the Caribbean's renowned intellectuals and academics. His PhD is in labor matters, and he continues to make a pronounced contribution to the intellectual life of Trinidad and Tobago. And not least, we have you in the audience. We want you to file your questions. We'll take as many as we can as we go through the afternoon. So I'm about to introduce Dr. Sami to open the batting. Before we do that, I thank you again very kindly for being with us this afternoon. I urge you to invite others to join the broadcast, to share the broadcast stream, and to file questions. We'll entertain as many as possible. In the business of cricket, there's always an opening batsman, and what I have found following cricket, including the IPL is taking place now, is the opening batsman often makes a lot of runs. We expect no less from the distinguished Dr. Alleyne Sami.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You're also very distinguished, Mr. Ken Ali. I am honored to be on this platform with former Senator Tahaka Obika, and I got to know him well during the first local, when he spoke at several platforms within the Penal Debe region. Of course, Dr. Munilal is a stalwart, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but internationally. And when you spoke about opening batsman, Mr. Moderator, and you mentioned cricket, what you didn't know is that Dr. Gopi Singh played cricket for Trinidad, and I believe he also played for Jamaica. So he is really the distinguished cricketer, and those of us who can't play cricket, we get into administration. So I want you to understand that. Now, I want to touch only on a few matters today because we have a distinguished panel, and they will be spending a lot of time on issues related to the expectations of the budget. Local government is in crisis, in serious crisis. Let me give you a brief overview of Penal Debe and point out that we're only one of 14 municipalities. There are 5 towns and cities and 9 regional corporations. We are one of the 9. We are only 240 square kilometers. We are a little smaller than Barbados. We have 90,000 people. But what is significant for Penal Debe at this time is 40% of Penal Debe lies within the Oropouche drainage basin. And what does that mean? It means a lot of water courses. It means a lot of flooding. And it means the failure of a central government to address the issue of flooding. Now, issue of flooding is not just flooding. It results in loss of millions of dollars of crops and household items, of animal life on an annual basis. Since 2017, we have had 9 serious floods, 9 in Penal Debe, 6 of which resulted in losses in the millions of dollars. And up to this time since Brett, there are a number of people who have not received any relief at all from the state, none at all. And how do we know that? Because when we ask people, did you get anything from the state? They say no. We find the occasional one, and I'm not sure how they are handpicked to become recipients. Now, what is our main function, and what do we expect of the budget? Our function really is to ensure that we create happiness for the people. Happiness, that's what people want, and how do we define happiness? Happiness is knowing that you are safe and secure in your home. Happiness is that you have good roads and drains, that your place is cleaned, that you have quick responses from either central government or local government or any other agency of the state to requests which you may have. You are tax-paying citizens. You are not being granted a favor by the state. You have worked for it as a citizen of this country or as a resident of this country. It is part of your expectation. But we have been failing in local government, and certainly over the past 5 years we have failed miserably at the central government level. So we are charged with delivering goods and services, and we hear that expression all the time. What are these goods? These goods can be easily measured as the physical things, the tangibles, the roads, the drains, the water courses. We are talking about maintenance, for example, of cemeteries, of the abattoirs which we may have, or the markets, of grounds and pavilions. We have 36 grounds in Penal Debe, 12 cemeteries for which we are responsible for having cleaned at all times. The worst thing that can happen is you go to a funeral, your own loved one has been lost, and it's a cemetery that's overgrown, And why is a cemetery overgrown? It is not that local government does not want to do anything there. It's simply because the resources are not made available. Now, let me explain this concept of resources. People think of resources only as financial resources, but I call it the 3 M's. It's man, money, and material. So money is only one component of it, but the manpower component is equally important in local government, and I'll give an example or two in a minute. And the material, meaning the resources that can be made available to us so we can do and effect the repairs that I spoke about. How are allocations granted on an annual basis? And this is the first failure of government in their inability to reform the methodology which is used to grant allowances, if you wish, or allocations as it's called in the central budget, how they grant allocations to various local government agencies. And it's based simply on what did you get last year? And I will give you the same amount or perhaps 5% less because there is no money in the system, or there is no manpower in the system, or there is no material in the system. So they will base it purely on what obtained in the past. They don't care how many people you have. They don't care how many roads and bridges and cemeteries and recreation grounds you have. They don't care how many miles of roadways you have. It is based simply on what obtained in the past. So the first local reform I'm expecting the Honourable Calm Member to propose by way of policy is they're going to entirely review the system within 1 year, and peg it to the national budget. So let us say 1% of the national budget or 2% is allocated simply for local government, and then use a formula. For example, the largest, most populous regional corporation is Tunapuna Piako. I'm saying their needs are greatest. By all means, give them the greatest share. I have no problem with that. Doesn't matter who is in government. They deserve it because they have more people, they have more challenges that we may have. By way of numbers, they have more challenges. And then pegging everything against that. So we may get out of that 1% of the national budget, 0.17%. But it's 0.17% of perhaps $1 billion or $2 billion. We know, based on our program of works, that with that sum of money, and if we are guaranteed it throughout the years, the next 5 to 10 years, that we can plan and program to effect change in penal DB. So the first position I'm hoping that the Minister will articulate is we are going to review the manner in which resources are allocated to local government. That then will determine what we get. The second major fault or shortcoming, and to me I could never understand it, why are there so many senior vacancies in local government? How can you have, and we have 4 officers or 5 officers, the CEO of course, and then the other officers who are there by law would be the engineer, the doctor, and the treasurer. And you have a system where sometimes there are vacancies in these positions. How can you have vacancies in these positions and expect that with the resources that are allocated to you, you can have maximum output? It's physically impossible. So that people who are junior and not trained are stretched to their limit to engage in implementation simply because you don't have senior staff to assist you along the way. So I'm saying, I am hoping that what the Honourable Minister will do is make some policy pronouncements in respect of staffing. It doesn't require any additional tremendous resources. It means you fill the vacancies with competent people because it exists already in law. How can we, and let me go quickly because I know that there are others who are jumping at the bit. So I'm proposing therefore policy changes. But a third major area of concern to me is allocations versus the actual release of these allocations. So let me give you an example. Penal DB was allocated the sum of $67 million for what is called goods and services, recurrent expenditure in the last financial year. But people think that we received $67 million. We did not. I want to point that out. And I don't believe any corporation, and I speak here even for P&M corporations because the P&M councils are afraid to speak out. do not receive all of their resources. But we are punished more because when they, as local government councillors, can go to any one of their ministerial colleagues and say, listen, help me out with a backhoe, help me out with material, or help me out with something, they get it, but we don't because we have nobody to go to. So we have a situation where allocations does not mean releases. So people hear these large figures, 67, what are they doing with it? I want to assure you, we do not get 67 million. It's an allocation on paper, but it is not a release in reality. What is happening at central or local government is therefore only decentralization. It's not meaningful devolution of authority. So I am really proposing with these policy changes, there is more meaningful devolution of authority. Some people don't know that our responsibilities only are for secondary roads. And they confuse what we do with what central government does. And the latest cry I've noticed over the past 2-3 years, as people are under tremendous stress and other ministries are not delivering, they come to you and they say, listen, we voted for you, you know. I don't care if that road is Ministry of Works. I don't care if that water course is Drainage Division. I don't care. We voted for you. And when, for example, you find that WASA digs up a hole to put their pipeline, we need the water, and they cannot cover it properly, the first thing we say, WASA. But when you go to WASA, they will quietly whisper to you, boy, we don't have the material to patch the road. So WASA is being starved in some instances. They therefore cannot repair the road. But the anger is not directed to WASA. The anger is directed to local government. So councillors are constantly being abused. And I'm talking abused, verbally abused by people. In some cases, I'm telling you, they are physically threatened. So when we, for example, are responsible only for secondary roads, and we have 243 secondary roads in Penal Debe, only 243, which is only 30% of our roads incidentally. 70% of the roads in Penal Debe that are not Ministry of Works are not vested in Penal Debe. So all the old Caroni roads, all the old oil field roads, all of the old private developers who have finished their development and have gone to Canada, abandon their roads. And then they come to Penal Debe and say, fix my road. We say, boy, legally we cannot fix your road. The government refuses to make provision for us as local government in law to go in and fix those secondary roads. And meanwhile, or those orphan roads as we call them, meanwhile, thousands of people live in those roads. Thousands. All of them paying rates and taxes. All of them paying VAT. All of them contributing to the economy. All of them gainfully employed. And we then have to turn around and say, I cannot help you. That can't be creating happiness. And let me end on one point. So what are the needs of the people? I am suggesting to you there is need for reform. In this budget, it is not too late. The minister can say, I will do the following things. I can reform, for example, the manner in which I release funds to you. I can eliminate some of the bureaucracy. Every single project that we do in Penal Debe has to go to Kent House for approval. Every single one. And not only us, 14 municipalities have to go to Kent House for approval. And who prepares our estimates? An engineer with senior people. And when it goes to Kent House, it is a project officer has to come and tell you proceed. How long does that take? Months. So meanwhile, you have applied, for example, in October or November for release of funds to engage in development works. You get the approval maybe in March or April of the following year to proceed. And then when there are unutilized balances, so for example, you estimate a job at $50,000, but you spend $37,000, so you have $13,000 remaining in it. You go through a procedure where you say, I want to extend the job. So you do the paperwork to extend the job. That has to go back to Port of Spain for approval. And if it goes too late, they say, too bad, that now goes into a column that is called unused. It is no longer unspent balances. Oh, sorry, I should not say unspent. Unutilized balances. It goes into unspent balances. And that has to be audited all over again. Let me give you a concrete example. We had 20 jobs that we asked the government to give us permission to proceed with these 20 additional jobs. I'm talking about last month. I'm talking about this few days before the end of the month. We submitted that for approval. 20 jobs. You know what they told us? And this is from unutilized. It means there were surpluses from jobs. They say, sorry, you sent it in too late. We have to go back now into your funds, but you have to resubmit. Let us first audit it. How long does it take to audit your accounts? 3, 4, 5 years. I want to repeat that. Sometimes it takes you 3, 4, 5 years to audit your accounts. And while you're waiting for the audit of that account, there is money sitting there. So the public hears local government have plenty money on spend balances. Plenty money. What are they doing with it? Why they don't spend it? And they don't understand the financial bureaucracy that has been imposed. I am saying that the Honorable Colman Burt can make a policy pronouncement and say, I shall eliminate the bottlenecks. I shall put a sum of money in some central place. You can account for it, but I will eliminate the bottlenecks. All he has to do is do that. That does not call for a majority in Parliament as far as I know. So finally, what am I saying? I am saying we need to devolve authority, not decentralize authority. Devolve authority to local governments. They are well staffed, at least at the highest level. Some people in middle management are missing. The second is I said that we must do a needs assessment, and I used Tunapuna as the example, and peg everything else against that. So you're guaranteed for the next 5 to 10 years how much you're getting, and you can structure your program of works accordingly. And then all the committees that are in various corporations, and they vary from corporation to corporation, and they are meant to deliver. Standardize the committees, standardize the terms of reference. So if we know there is a community development committee in one corporation, we know more or less in the other corporations, they are seeking to attain the same objectives where you use the skills of the community to make more effective and efficient government. So those are my few words of introduction. I look forward to any questions later in the discussion. Feel free, please, to call me. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alan Sami. Thank you so much. An expert on, among other things, local government. And I was riveted by your presentation, Dr. Sami, and I know I speak for all others who are in the audience. And as you spoke and educated us on local government, it reminds me that in the 2015 general election manifesto of the party that is in power now and was in power for the past 5 years, there were manifesto promises to attend to the very matter you spoke about, and that is devolving authority in local government. And none of that has taken place. As one of the questions moving forward, I certainly would want to get your thoughts on what the government's thinking, what your views on the government's thinking on local government, the evolution of authority and decentralization. Dr. Alan Sami, we thank him very much. He's the chairman of the Penal Debe Regional Corporation, our opening speaker today, speaking on the local government sector as it pertains to the national budget. This is a live discussion on the Trinidad and Tobago 2020-2021 national budget. It is taking place from the offices of the Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, the Honorable Dr. Rudal Munilal. We have a high-powered team of panelists, and before I introduce the second member, just a few house announcements. One, I want to thank members of the media who are in our audience. We thank you very much. We thank all those who are with us on social media. We are very grateful, and in addition to that, we urge you to send your questions in. If you are viewing us as you are on social media, send your questions in, and at the end of the panel presentations, we will ask the various panelists to respond. So Charmaine is indicating a signal that looks like when the umpire is appealing to the third umpire. The video. You see, I told you it looks a little bit like the appeal to the third umpire. Yes. Please, if you are on Zoom, you please put on your videos. Yeah? It does look a little bit like a cricketing expression and illustration. Thank you very much. Here I just want to acknowledge the very good work of the very hard-working and competent William Archie and his team. We have with us Alderman Kevin Gibbs. We have Kevin Gibbs and another team of other resourceful colleagues. We thank you all very much. We are exercising COVID-19 hygienic measures. We wish to assure you of that. We thank you for being with us, and we urge that you share the broadcast. Okay, we get to our second panelist. One of the Caribbean's bright young thinkers. He served in the Senate, the upper house of Trinidad and Tobago. He is an economist. He studied abroad and comes from a very eminent family of socially conscious people. His father was ambassador to Southern Africa. Nigeria, the giant Nigeria of 90 million people. Former Senator Tahaka Obika, one of the bright young stars in Trinidad and Tobago's public life, and someone, as they say in sport, keep your eyes on him. We are very grateful to have him today, and we look forward to his contribution on the economy and what he anticipates in the upcoming budget. Mr. Obika.
Thank you, moderator. Mr. Ken Alley, the Venerable Ken Alley. I want to thank, of course, our gracious host today, the Honorable Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, Dr. Rudal Munilal. Of course, I recognize fellow panelists, Dr. Alan Sami, and of course, Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, and all you from St. Lucia, Mr. Prevel, and all persons watching online. Now, the government will soon learn that after election, there is no campaign. Because they've campaigned for 5 long years in government. They did not govern for 5 years, and they campaigned for 5 years in government. But now, they will soon learn that after election, no campaign. The people of Trinidad and Tobago will make sure they understand that. But if we were to take what was said at the spotlight on the economy on Monday as an indication as to what this Minister of Finance will present in 2 days' time on Monday morning in the Parliament, we must brace, and we must brace very well. Because the Ministry of Finance, the headline for their document was, "Where the money gone? Mystery or mischief?" Now, one would think that is a very mischievous title for a presentation from a Ministry of Finance headlining a spotlight on an economy. But it goes to show you the lack of confidence that the public servants have in the government. Of course, the government would think that such a headline is convenient to their motives and their narrative, that the economy failed because of external circumstances beyond their control in the energy sector, and of course because of COVID-19. But the economy crashed before COVID. We've said that already. We've established that this week. The economy crashed before COVID. What exactly has not crashed is the funds going to the friends of the government, the rich getting richer, in the words of the Prime Minister, you know. So that was the headline in the presentation. Now, after spending over $250 billion for a Ministry of Finance to be putting as the headline of their presentation, "Where the money gone? Mystery or mischief?" is in itself an element of mischief. What should have happened at that spotlight was clarity. Right now, economically, if we are in a dark time, people would have expected some light to beam through in that presentation. But all we got was a presentation that lived up to its headline, with more questions than answers on where the money that this government has spent have gone. Now, in terms of priority, the recent distribution of laptops by none other than Marshall Montano and other private sector organizations and foundations shows you that the government has no intention of funneling the money in education. They have no desire to spend any money behind the education of our children. So don't look for a budget that speaks to education. Because if in a pandemic where St. Vincent and Guyana could find it necessary to give every single child the opportunity to have a device to access education, but in so-called wealthy Trinidad and Tobago, our government has decided that the weaning off of the government agenda extends to children. It means that they have no intention of making sure no child is left behind, despite the words of the Prime Minister to the United Nations earlier last month. Now instead, where is the money going? The rich are getting richer. The money is going to pay rent for 1 Alexandria and 3 Alexandria. So the question still stands. Have the owners of 1 Alexandria and 3 Alexandria connected to that high-ranking P&M government official? Have they bucked the trend of the rich getting richer and decided to give any reprieve, any rental reprieve, any stay on paying rents to the taxpayers? Or have they continued to eat at the trough of the treasury in this country, where everyone is expected to brace, but they still benefit in that 23 million plus in rent? Now, the money has not gone to better roads. The video of the war zone that is Rosilac, that would have shocked many Trinidadians, not me because I have to drive there to go home every day to reach Point Fortin. And then of course the lies by the government that they were planning to pave the road this week, but because of the rains they stopped. You know, it shows you that these are governance issues. When you take taxpayers' dollars, you need to focus on governance. And if they have not been governing, don't expect them to govern to begin governing now. Because the rich must get richer under this government. Now, the money has also not gone to support the arts and culture. Evident and proper evidence of that is the recent eviction of Errol Fabian, a national icon. And I too want to pay my respects to the passing of Dennis Hall Sprangalan. Got many expressions from him, you know. Growing up in the creative industry, growing up in NJAC, Sprangalan was an institution. He was so our library has been burnt down with the passing of Sprangalan, you know. And the culture sector workers, what has happened with Errol Fabian, not a single government minister found it necessary to move a finger in favor of Errol Fabian. That should serve as a warning to the entire creative sector in this country that you do not matter to this government. Because if Gael, the channel, is not important to save, with one of the largest libraries of moving pictures in the Caribbean, then you could bet your last dollar that where there is a soca, chutney, drummer, dancer, stage builder, lights holder, copywriter, you don't matter to this government. Because if Gael, with their large and vast library, with their platform for the creative industry in this country, this cultural capital of the Caribbean, does not matter, then you don't matter to this government. That is clear. So of course the government would have found the headline, where the money gone, mystery of mischief. They would have thought that it's convenient, again, to their narrative of COVID-19. The closure of Petrotrin and the attendant job losses, as well as the poor negotiations that crashed the supply chains in Point Lisas, is the doing of this same government. All that was a cabinet reshuffle. A minor cabinet reshuffle in August. All right? It's the same old side. All right? Just a little bit of window dressing here and there. Now, the question about jobs. There was a joke that was unfortunately published in the central bank document about the amount of persons that were laid off earlier this year. I don't know, they were counting the days in the year that they found the number was close enough to 365 that they published 375 persons losing their jobs. Or if they were mentioning 375 persons maybe in one village alone. But clearly, the intelligence of the nation would have been totally insulted by printing that figure of less than 400 persons losing their jobs in this country. But that's a matter for another day. Because it speaks to what is the plan of the government. That speaks to subversion of the truth. A nation without data cannot even analyze its present situation. So what we are facing is a nation where even the researchers are being robbed of the data to make informed decisions. So you can only imagine what information is being fed to the policymakers in the government and those that have to implement. Implementing policy with bad data is a double-edged sword. But anyway, let's go to what is the focus of this government and what you may expect in 2 days' time in terms of a budget presentation. Apart from, of course, the rich getting richer as a Minister of Finance, changing the law and personally benefiting in the process regarding multi-story dwelling units. Of course, he may have recused himself, but the funds in his account would not have been recused either. So that is just something to consider. The TTRE, the Trinidad Revenue Authority, all right, where a minister is seeking every year to insert himself into the process to control the BIR and customs, removing the security of tenure of the Director General that would be appointed. What that would mean is an erosion or an outright removal of privacy of taxpayer information. And there are some business persons asking, why is that important for me to have my taxpayer information private? Of course, alluding to, I have nothing to hide, that narrative. But they would appreciate if they're in the middle of a market share war with a major competitor whose friend happens to be a Minister of Finance. Then that Minister of Finance, if he is corrupt, can of course procure information from a compliant Director General of this new revenue authority and disclose to your competition the true strength of your organization, the resources of your spouse, yourself, your brothers, and your business partners. And they will know exactly which buttons to push. They will know exactly which shipments to stall. They will know exactly how long they can stall it for. And they will know exactly how to cripple your enterprise. Of course, you don't even have to have anything to hide for you to fall victim to acts in concert between your competition and a government minister who is corrupt and in control of a Director General in charge of the revenue authority that they intend to form. Of course, remember, the revenue authority will also control customs. And they will control the taxpayer, the tax office. So they will have all opportunity to mash up, as we say, your business. So the next time a business owner, in a moment of self-righteous indignation, declares they have nothing to hide, and that's the rationale for supporting the revenue authority, just think, just remember that in this country, price wars collapsed empires. So you could think you're big now. Just draw your mind back. Even in my 37 years, I can remember a few price wars that collapsed some erstwhile strong and resilient, well-fortified financially and in terms of market share, business empires. And there are no more today. I won't call their names because if you're in business, you would know them all too well. So the Revenue Authority is what they are planning to come with, and they will claim that it will improve the taxation regime and income and so on. But what they're not going to tell you is the opportunity for political mischief and misbehavior in public office of a Minister of Finance who is corrupt. Property tax. Property tax is touted as the panacea. And we've all seen the picture that is now like a meme that is broadcast all over Facebook of a Keith Rowley in 2009, then not in good graces with the Prime Minister, the late Patrick Manning, making a very strong and cogent argument against the property tax, at least for his mind at that time. What has changed? The land and building tax regime would have generated $80 to $100 million a year before it was wound up. The property tax scheme might generate $250 million to $500 million, at best $500 million, based on their estimates. Now, if it's $500 million at best, the difference between that and the land and building tax is $400 million. That is less than 1%, considerably less than 1% of the expenditure of the government. So are we saying that we're going to pressure beyond the imagination the entire citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago with this new tax, whilst at the same time it only generates a nuisance value addition to our revenue stream? And of course the argument they will bring forward is that the Minister of Finance prior, Larry Hawaii, was planning to bring tax in by 2017 and so on. Even if he didn't make a mistake and was referring to the property tax in error, even if he did not make a mistake in terms of the language and he was actually referring to a property tax, the fact that he was phasing it in based on the circumstances that would prevail at that time meant that there was a human factor to be considered. Now is the worst time to introduce any tax on property to citizens, especially where persons are being chased out of their homes, just as was the case of Mr. Errol Fabian, because of lack of economic opportunity. It is sinister in the least. It is downright wickedness to introduce a property tax based on rental receipts, based on rental value, assessed rental value, given the circumstances that we face today, especially given that all it will generate is less than 1% of the revenue, of the expenditure that the government spends every year. VAT returns. They will come with VAT returns. And the government's non-payment of VAT returns can mean one of two things: suffocation for businesses in terms of liquidity, or higher prices. So if the business take the former, that means that they are waiting for these VAT returns and then they have shortages in terms of their working capital. And of course, businesses can collapse because that's the lifeblood of the business. If, however, they decide that they're not waiting for the VAT returns because this government owing over $6 billion, and a Minister of Finance in the same spotlight on the economy, when asked by a member of the business community how much VAT returns are still owed, he dodged the answer and basically referred to $3 billion being paid. So basically, I mean, he has deceived the population, because you are saying that you are honoring VAT returns, but you can't honor the simple answer to a question as to how much are still outstanding. Again, that is an issue there. So the prices will be higher for the population because the business community will not wait for these VAT returns that wouldn't arrive. The government, during the last 5 years of their campaigning, their perennial campaigns, the Prime Minister spoke about not going back to the IMF. Every year, he promised that. But what they wouldn't tell you, but it's there in the central bank documents, is that they went to the World Bank, who works in concert with the IMF, to get over $135 million this year. That is the currency of legal tender in Trinidad and Tobago. $135 million from the World Bank for this year. So they've gone back to the World Bank. Whether they want to say that it's not the IMF and be pedantic, that is up to them. What exactly are the conditionalities that lie? What are there hidden conditionalities? when you don't level with a population, we have to ask these questions even more. So they are borrowing to pretend that we have reserves to cover import cover. Last year, the amount in terms of debt service was 20%, more than 20% of our revenue. With these extra borrowings that they're engaging in, $500 million US again earlier this year, how much would be the debt service? Which means less money for you to build schools, which they have not really focused on building at all anyhow. Less money for you to pave roads, which they have not paved anyway either. Because if they couldn't pave the road during an election campaign, bet your bottom dollar they're not going to pave it in this five-year period here. Now, when you look at the situation with Errol Fabian, it's a test case, it's a symptom of a wider disease. That is, citizens are being chased out of their homes, and when you turn to the Central Bank Economic Bulletin in July, published in September, they said that consumer lending grew, supported by, mainly, by lending for debt consolidation and refinancing. People catching the whole family, aunt, uncle, and everybody. Because debt consolidation and refinancing hints to the fact that people simply cannot afford to pay their existing debt obligations and they have to work it over a new period. So families across the nation are in danger of losing their homes. They're being chased out of their homes by this policy of flatlining the economy. Now, I want to close on revitalizing the economy. Now, I wouldn't spend time in a budget consultation outlining plans, because we outlined very cogent plans before the election. But one left foot and one right foot later, we are here with a government that doesn't know how to govern. So what I will point to is their failings. The election has ended. The Rowley regime, after the cabinet reshuffle, must not campaign anymore. So for the first time, they have no one else to blame but themselves. When you look to the poor road network, blame Rowley. When you look at no delivering of schools, whoever is the Minister of Education, you blame the Minister of Education for being incompetent. The fact that they have not settled wage disputes, the last Minister of Labour and the new Minister of Labour, incompetent, you blame them. Closure of TTHTI, shutting down the tourism education opportunities for students in this country. They have a smaller campus in Tobago, but we know economically it will be almost impossible for persons to find themselves in Tobago paying rent to go to school from Trinidad. So you've shut out students, collapsed the GATE program, and of course, Minister of Education changed, new minister, same incompetence, because TTHI is still closed. Less than $5 million they couldn't find for that, but they could find $23 million for one Alexandria and three Alexandria. Increasing poverty across the nation, they have to blame themselves for that. The high rate of crimes and murder, and of course the corruption amongst high-ranking government officials connected to receiving rents, wives getting consultancy contracts, spouses getting CPEP contracts, fathers and guardians getting big financing, insurance deals. At the end of the day, this government has nothing else to do but to govern. They have to stop campaigning. After election, no campaign. They must stop campaigning and govern, but don't hold your breath. Because just like the primary school children and secondary school students waiting in vain for their laptops, you too will wait in vain for Keith Rowley and his team to stop campaigning and govern. Thank you.
Mr. Tahaka Obika, I said at the start and I reiterate, one of the finest young minds, especially on economic and governance issues in Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. Obika, that was one of the finest presentations I've heard, especially in quick time. A tremendous wrap-up of the economic issues. Keep your eyes on him, one of the country's bright young thinkers. Extraordinarily well done. I imagine for the budget you will have media bookings. If not, I have one for you. I want you to analyze it on the budget day, but we'll talk about that. Again, thank you very, very much, Mr. Tahaka Obika. Thank you very much for being with us in this audience. We are at the offices of Dr. Rudal Budilal, the Member of Parliament for Oropouche East. This is a discussion on the 2020-2021 national budget to be presented on Monday. We have a very eminent team of panelists. We've had two presentations so far from Dr. Alan Sami and former Senator Tahaka Obika. We have three more, including one of the Caribbean's renowned thinkers and academics. We'll get to that. Just I've been advised by Shemaine to ask everyone who is on Zoom to turn on your video. Turn on your video if you're on Zoom. In addition to that, Kumari reminds me to ask you to file your questions on social media. Send in your questions. We'll have a question and answer period, and we certainly want to pick the minds of these eminent panelists. Send your questions. Again, I thank you wherever you are. I understand our audience, apart from Trinidad and Tobago, includes the Caribbean, and we thank you for being here, members of our diaspora and outside of that. Thank you very, very much for being here, and I know it's worth all of our while. This is a tremendous discussion, and we're just in the middle of it. Thanks to the media for being in our virtual audience. We want to assure you we are complying with all COVID-19 regulations. There's a small team of us here, and we are exercising all the hygienic measures well. When I was a young man growing up, there used to be Dave Elcock with the countdown of the top 10. And when he got to the top songs, he said, we get to where the air is rare. When you are going to introduce Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, that's what you have to say, and other things. Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, one of my mentors, a renowned person a professional in the world of medicine. He's a surgeon, and he has practiced his profession around the world. More than that, he was a transformative Minister of Education from the year 2010 to the year 2015, a transformative Minister of Education. He was a professor at the university. He has remained vital to the intellectual life of this country for many, many years. This week he was commenting on pertinent issues of health and calling for reform. Just as our two previous speakers have been talking about reform, governance reform, he was speaking about that. He is extremely knowledgeable, and the changes he made and the positive changes in the education sector would redound to the benefit of our students for a generation to come, maybe for generations. It's a tremendous honor to share the room with Dr. Gopi Singh, and I, for one, will be very attuned to his contribution. Ladies and gentlemen in our audience, I wish to introduce Dr. Tim Gopi Singh.
Again, sometimes I wonder if it's the same Tim that Ken speaks about. It's so many years now, Ken. I'm happy to be out of the mainstream of the cabinet and parliamentary politics, because I've been there for almost 20 years in Parliament, and 6 years before that working through with Mr. Pandey, helping to shape the United National Congress at that time. My distinguished friend, younger brother, and brilliant Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, Dr. Rudal Munilal, who is known through the Caribbean as well in his formal training in law and in labor law, where he has worked in one or two countries within the Caribbean. My former senatorial colleague, Tahaka Obika, my friend for a long time in cricketing world, Alan Sami, before he was chairman of the Princestown Regional, Pinal Debe Regional Corporation. And our good friend in St. Lucia, Dr. Claudius Prevail. Claudius, it's nice having you with us today on this platform. I was pleased to accept the invitation from my friend, Dr. Rudal Munilal, to speak today on this virtual meeting on health and education. And I have been following the issues in health. Well, I have been there for 45 years as a doctor, 38 years as a cancer specialist, etc. And of course with the University of the West Indies as an associate professor, teaching medical students at the undergraduate level and postgraduate level. And of course, having had the experience of working, I believe, close to about 17 or 18 hospitals around the world in United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and the Caribbean as well. So health has been at my heart. And within the last 6 months, since the COVID came in, not within 9 months, because COVID started even in November in China. China, it was exposed in December. I was following what was going on there on the international television, and I knew for a fact that this was going to come to the Western world, moving across to Europe from China. So I discussed with my colleagues in January, should I raise the motion on the COVID issue, and I got a unanimous yes. So I raised it on the 31st of January, declined by the Speaker. I went for my surgery for my knee on the 4th of February. And today I also want to indicate that I wrote a little personal note to Honorable Prime Minister through WhatsApp. I don't know whether he got the WhatsApp in, I think it was February 9th or 10th or something. I indicated to him that he should take a leadership role as far as this COVID issue is concerned for the Caribbean, and take a leadership role in Trinidad and Tobago and bring this to the forefront urgently. Well, they had a CARICOM meeting on this, I believe in later February, but it's only in March that this COVID issue came to the forefront in Trinidad and Tobago. And the Prime Minister then decided that he would close borders, etc. After it had swept through Europe and was in the United States and next door to us in Miami and New York, etc., where most of our people visit. And then, of course, on the cruise ships. But by then it was late already. Carnival had passed, and there were questions asked about whether Carnival should have been held in the first place. And I'm happy that Carnival is not going to be held next year. And that is critically important because lives are very valuable. I, having been blessed by God and the prayers of many of my friends and colleagues and patients and the general public, I was spared of the wrath of this COVID virus with damage to your lung and so on, and I have recovered fully, but thank God for the prayers. And may I, at this time also, through the American Embassy, extend our sincerest best wishes for a speedy, safe, and fast recovery to the United States President, Mr. Donald Trump, and to all the people of the United States. Our hearts are with you and the rest of the world who are praying for his speedy recovery as well. And of course, my friend Jack Warner, who also survived through this ordeal, and the hundreds, almost 3,000 now, who have had the COVID virus, but on a mild to moderate phase. But it's now basically 6 months. And when the country is speaking about a second wave of COVID, I beg to disagree. I am, for once, said earlier on that there were not enough tests being done, echoed by my political leader then and opposition leader, and by many others, that there were not enough tests being done, whether it was deliberate or not. And so the true aspect of the COVID virus was not there. And whether it was meant to keep the figures down before election, we don't know. And only they themselves will know what it is that they did. But suddenly after election, it exploded. Suddenly we can find more tests being done. Suddenly you allow the private nursing homes to do the testing. And there it was. What was there before was now coming to the general public by the amount of cases that were being tested. And the more tests you do, the more that you will find that there are more, the incidence is higher. So why all of a sudden this happened? So it's no second phase of this virus. There's no second phase. It's the continuation and the abrupt release of information, the amount more testing being done, and the diagnosis being made with more regularity. And we had been asking for this through the leader of the opposition and the team, through parliamentary thing, from since March, to have a bipartisan team to work with the government and bring about the policies that are critically important for the management of this. But it was refused. And I still call on Prime Minister Rowley and his government to work with the constitutionally enshrined opposition, which got, in fact, more votes in Trinidad than his government, and they have a legitimate cause to be there to work with the government because they represent the entire population as well. They are the alternate government. So there are certain issues that still confront us in the health sector as far as the 6 months issue in COVID is concerned. One, why has there been a tremendous increase in the deaths of citizens at the ICU unit at Couva Hospital? My latest count, I think it was 76, when we had 8 or 9 before the election time. What has happened? And you are now being labeled, I extend my heartfelt sympathy and condolences to the families of all those unfortunate senior citizens who passed away at the ICU unit and outside of the ICU unit because of COVID since March. So there are questions for the Minister of Health to answer. Why have you given a true appreciation of how many patients went into the ICU unit and how many passed away, unfortunately, and how many came out alive? This is an answer that the country needs. So whether you have a 10% coming out alive or 95% passing away, you have to analyze what is going on at the ICU unit. How many intensivists are there? How many top-line medical specialists, specialist physicians, and anesthetists who are very skilled in this are attending to the patients, not the younger doctors, not the middle-range doctors? How many needed tracheostomy? How many needed to be turned and helped with their respiratory problems? We are just hearing that you're lumping everybody. You're a senior citizen with comorbidity of hypertension and diabetes and obesity. That cannot be a reason for just lumping the 76 people and saying they're dead because they're obese, they're diabetic, they're hypertensive, and they're elderly. What is your definition for elderly? It has come to my understanding that above 55 is the definition. 55 in today's world is a young person. So there are questions surrounding the management within the intensive care units at the hospital, at CUVA. And then are you really monitoring the people outside there who are in quarantine, and you said that they are calling in late and they are dying on the way before coming to the hospital? Your role is to monitor them very appropriately, scientifically and medically. You have to have your teams not just by a telephone call. Thank God I was good, so when they called me on a daily basis twice per day, I was able to say, yes, I'm good, because I was good. But there are patients out there who are having respiratory problems and don't understand what is happening to them, and they're coming late and they're dying from it. So then the question of testing, the antigen testing, we raised that months ago, and the minister said, what antigen testing you're talking about? When the rest of the world was doing the antigen testing, which was at 85% sensitivity, and which could give you the results in a few hours. How could President Trump and the rest of the United States people and Europe and so on do testing and getting the results in 20 minutes and in half an hour? And then you're coming to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago you're getting it in November. This is September. So you have to answer. Then today I read where someone who did an analysis of the amount of cases that were said to be done and the incidence of it, and there is a 1,200 discrepancy in what was reported in September. These are questions that must be answered. Now, COVID management. Senator Tahaka, former Senator Tahaka, spoke about the financial aspect. In Parliament, the government got $20 billion released. 10 billion from the HSF, 10 billion for capital development funding. There are 20 billion available to them. Then the international agencies gave them lots of money, millions of dollars. The country is still the country still does not know how much money has been spent on the COVID in terms of personal protective equipment, whether the kits, whether the stay for the patients and the management of these patients, the payment to doctors, how much was really spent on COVID, and what has happened to the rest of the money that they said was for COVID. So the government has to answer these questions, and these answers are not forthcoming. The other issue on the health aspect is 6 months now that we have the COVID virus in Trinidad, and the minister and his team speak about a parallel health system. A parallel health system is where you take the COVID patients and you treat them separately, and the other type of system for the healthcare working separately. Now, our understanding is that the patients are suffering who were supposed to go to clinics, and they're not getting the ability to reach to the clinic and to be managed by the doctors in the clinic. Lots of people are having problems getting their surgeries performed, elective surgeries performed. In 1998, when I was chairman of 2 of the 4 regional health authorities in Trinidad, in my earlier days, I did an analysis in those days of the amount of operations being done at Port of Spain and San Fernando. Mount Hope was not on stream at that time. Port of Spain was doing, San Fernando was doing about 7,500, Port of Spain was doing about 3,000 major operations. So that's about 10,005. And then Mount Hope came on stream, and Mount Hope started to do about 3,000, 3,005. So about 14,000 operations, elective surgery. 6 months of that will probably be equivalent to 7,000 patients. How many of those patients waiting for surgery would have had their surgery done? The Minister of Health and his team must tell the country at Port of Spain Hospital how much elective surgery was done, At Mount Hope, how much elective surgery was done, and at San Fernando Hospital, how much elective surgery. And I'm sure he will know for himself that it has been inadequate. Patients will not be able to receive the care. Hundreds of patients did not get their operations for breast lump, for biopsy of colonic masses, for cancers, for hernias, and basically some other major operations to deal with the cancers and so on. So the whole issue of the parallel healthcare system, enough information has not been given to that, and the population is swallowing that there is a parallel health system. But the parallel health system has failed, and has failed miserably. And the government must account to the population as far as this is concerned as well. So the time and the effort has to be to develop policies and programs working with the health professionals who could help them, and of course bring in a bipartisan manner the opposition, and who have the brain power as well to help the government in the management of this. So these are the issues. I can speak about the health that my colleague Dr. Munilal has asked me to speak on. I focus particularly on the COVID aspect. But of course, this is a budget. The government spent $287 billion over a 5-year period between 2015 to 2020. I have the figures here, and it's not for me to read it out at this time, but I'm sure Tahaka will, it is here. They spent 58 billion in 2016, 56 in 2017, 56 in 2018, 56 in 2019, around that. And in 2020, the estimate was $60.7 billion, 277.8 billion, and they had infrastructure development fund of 9 billion. So where have all that money gone as for the health sector? And we know this evening is not a time for us to reflect on all the negative issues put into the health sector before COVID started. All the overcrowding and patients dying on corridors, and they can't get the medicine, they can't get the pharmaceuticals, or CDAP drugs. Bodies were rotting in the mortuary, the ceiling were collapsing. What a real mess! A real mess in the health sector before even COVID started. So for 5 years, at an average, 5.6 billion spent on the health sector per year, 28 billion spent on the health sector, and what has happened to it? It was collapsing, and it became worse subsequent to COVID. So to close here, I want to make some recommendations to the government on the issue of the management of the health sector and the way forward. The regional health authorities, as I stated earlier, they are outdated. Britain started it in the 1990s. They have moved away from that 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the way. It was brought in by the PNM government with Minister Eckstein at that time, 94 to 97. And subsequent to that, I became chairman of 2 of the 4 regional health authorities under Mr. Pandey, that's in the Northwest, and then later the North Central. But it is now outdated. The regional health authorities cannot do the work. They're not performing with the management capacity and capability that they ought to perform. Square pegs are in round holes. People are picked to be board chairmen and board members and CEOs based on political affiliation. We want people of competence and capacities and capabilities. We do not want board members to be sitting in the boardroom and trying to determine what is happening in the hospitals. Take a walk. The chairman and his team must take a walk with the head of nursing, head of medicine, the medical director, the head of pharmacy, the chief medical officer, and the CEO on a regular basis, and if they do that, they will be able to find out the problems and not find out later that there is not even one CT machine running for all the regional health authorities in Trinidad. It's time that we look at that and bring the thing from 4 to 2 in the first instant. Then we don't have an understanding of how many doctors, nurses, nursing assistants, nursing attendants, paramedicals in the country. No one has done that. I was asking senior members of the ministry up to this week Do you have an understanding of how many people are in the regional health authorities? No. You don't know how many doctors are there, how many nurses are there, how many vacancies are there. How could you run a health sector when that is? So you need a swift analysis of the human resource management. And you need to update, bring about your management capacity and capability with the responsibility that it requires. Don't allow lives to be lost because of your laziness and your inability to move out of your boardroom. And when Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa asked me to act in health a few times while we were in government, I took the opportunity to go to Mount Hope and call the CEO. CEO, come with me. When was the last time you walked the hospital as you're walking today? There was a hush because he hadn't walked the hospital, and this is what I'm speaking about. I want to make a few other recommendations. I want to ask the government to consider a special national lottery, as is being done by Princess Margaret Hospital, for oncology, for cancer patients, for the prevention, early detection and management of cancer patients, because it's an expensive proposition. The lottery board doing whatever they want with the money, there are all sorts of things going on there. Form a special lottery for oncology so that our cancer patients could be taken care of. And we need reform of the purchase of pharmaceuticals. We buy over $600 million per year in pharmaceuticals, and one company alone purchases over 350 million of this. So, and then we need to look at what are the drugs that are not efficacious and are not working, and bring the National Advisory Committee on pharmaceuticals and bring them together to analyze the drugs that we have, and throw out these 5 cents and 10 cents drugs that are treating CDAP, diabetes and hypertension, and the patients. I asked the Minister of Health that when I was in opposition. He said they're going to change it. He never changed it. So people are still getting the 5 cents and 2 cents drugs for the management of the diabetes and the hypertension, which is a forerunner to blindness, to amputations, to kidney disease, to heart disease, to strokes, and everything else. So get that in order. Perhaps the Prime Minister can go to the CARICOM and ask for the purchase of pharmaceuticals from a CARICOM-wide basis, so it would make it cheaper, and for all the countries to be assisted. Not only, and for the management of chronic non-communicable diseases. Dr. Munilal will remember Mrs. Bisesa appointed a team to assist Minister Khan in the health sector when we knew that there were problems in the health sector. And the issue of the chronic non-communicable disease was the #1 issue: diabetes, hypertension, and cancer. We immediately went on to change over and reconstruct and refurbish 67 out of the 105 health centers. There are 105 health centers in Trinidad and Tobago, 7 district health facilities which are supposed to be open 24 hours per day, and of course 10 major hospitals. You mean to say you can't manage that? Chronic non-communicable diseases is the forerunner to all the things that the patients that go into hospitals. So you need to pay a lot of emphasis on that. We need to look at health tourism. There is the consideration now that could be given to bring in an offshore medical school, possibly in Tobago. When we first started the medical school in 1987 in Trinidad, 49% of the patients came from Manipal University, paying $12,000 US per month admission into the medical school, because the NAR government had said you can't open Mount Hope unless you become self-sufficient. And we devised a red book, a famous red book with Professor Melville, Alan Butler, Bartholomew, Michael Bobron, David Piku, and a team. And Mount Hope was opened in 1987 because we took in 49% of the students at the medical school from Manipal University. We need to bring in a medical school. We have the capacity to train them at 10 hospitals in Trinidad and in Tobago as well. So this is something that can happen. We need to bring back the oncology center, partner with the international hospitals and so on. They are Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, Mount Sinai. All these are major cancer institutions that you can partner with and help to bring back the oncology center into Trinidad, because the people of Caribbean have to go to the north to get their cancer management. And then centralize the hospitals to have centers for various specialties. In North, you can have one hospital to deal with orthopedics, neurosurgery, ENT, ophthalmology. It doesn't have to be the same hospital. But you need to centralize all of that into one place rather than orthopedics being done in one hospital, another hospital, and they're all over the place, and the doctors are uncoordinated and working 2 or 3 here, 2 or 3 here. That ought to be looked at. So these are some of the recommendations I want to make as far as the health sector is concerned and the COVID issue. Now, for a few minutes more, the effect of COVID on the education system. You know, it has created so much unhappiness and stress for parents, the students, the teachers, the wider population. We have almost 250,000 students in schools. We have 480 primary schools, 124 secondary schools, and so on. And we have about 126,000 private primary school students, and about 96,000 secondary school students. When the government says that we want 60,000 laptops or equipment, on what basis they make that? Did anybody from the Ministry of Education do an analysis with the principals and the school supervisors to find out how many of the students outside there? Thousands of students are being left out now of the education, and it is 6 months, it will go on to 9 months, it will go on to next year. And we will have a lost generation pretty shortly if the government doesn't take stock of itself and do what is required. Put your tail between your legs and purchase the equipment for all the students in Trinidad and Tobago. Make sure that the principals of the school have the paper and the photocopying machine and all the mechanisms to allow for dispensation of all the programs in the schools. And find out how many of the parents have to stay home with their children to work with them on a daily basis so that they can get their education. We don't know when these students will go back to school. They're out of school 6 months already. School will not be open between October and December. That's another 3 months, that's 9 months. We don't know whether that will go on to January or February because we don't know what is the behavior of the virus. So how long are parents going to be suffering? How long are the students not being able to get the education which they need because a little child in Barakpo or in Penal who is in an area that cannot get the internet capacity and cannot get the communication through the internet, what is happening to them? They are being left out. Why can't you work with the service providers of TSTT, Flow and Digicel and ask them to wire up the country as fast as possible so that we can get internet connectivity? Do the internet connectivity in the schools, increase it so the students and who live close to the school can get a byproduct of that. You didn't provide one textbook for the student. Kamla Prasad Biswas administration provided almost 2 million textbooks for the students. You haven't purchased one laptop for the students. You haven't purchased one piece of equipment to help these students. What are you doing? Now, you're saving from the school feeding program about $90 million between September to December because 155,000 meals at $9 for one, for 65 days of the year, 13 weeks by 5 days of the week, you're saving $90 million. You haven't been giving the children the meals. So how are you dealing with that? Also, you're saving another $12 million from the transport for the students throughout the country, from the rural areas into the school. So there are lots of things that you have to do. You're begging. You have $280 million that you spent, but you have to come cap in hand begging the public sector to give the poor children laptops. That's a shame. It is an abominable shame for a government to relinquish their duty and their constitutional duty to the children. And you have failed in that, man. Come on. You can do better than that. And so Ladies and gentlemen who are viewing, my colleagues, it has been a pleasure and a privilege to speak on this matter, on these matters in period of time. And I thank you for the opportunity, Rudy, to give my perspective on this, and I'm available for questions. Thank you very much.
Dr. Gopi Singh, don't take your seat yet. We have a number of questions, and we have a number of viewers from abroad and locally and so on. But there's one question I want to take now because it comes from a member of the media, and the media always has deadlines, so I'd like you to treat with it now. It's a question from Cindy Ragubar of TV6, and we thank you, and we acknowledge the presence of some journalists here also. And Ms. Raguba is asking you, Dr. Gopi Singh, given your comments on COVID and the lack of testing in the beginning and the number of deaths, etc., what are your thoughts on the Ministry of Health's statement that there has been a 35% decrease in COVID cases?
Where's the empirical data? Where's the empirical data to substantiate that statement? There's no empirical data. I saw the epidemiologist, Dr. Hines, a very brilliant young man. I'm proud of it. I think I must have had the opportunity to teach him at one time at medical school, and so many of the thousands of doctors around who are in Trinidad. But when they take a number of samples, Cindy, and they lump them together and then try to dissect it, which one was taken on which day, and then try to give retrospective type of data. This data is not coming forward in a clean and forthright manner, and the population is troubled by it. We are troubled by it. And look, one of the guys who does analysis and so on, he said that there's a 1,200 discrepancy. So the figures that are coming out are not reliable figures. They are unreliable. So when Prime Minister Rowley decides to go on TV and so on and make a statement, well, based on the figures we see there's a decrease, and so we will open up. He's not privileged to have the correct information, because the correct information is not being done, and the analysis is not being done in a scientific manner to tell you that there is a decrease of 30%. In fact, there might be an increase. So we have 76 deaths. Is there a decrease in deaths? Why should a person above 55, because they have diabetes or hypertension or both, die? I am mildly hypertensive, but I'm well controlled. I lost some weight, and I might have been a little over my weight. So I'm above 55, so I should have been consigned to die. So, and they say it flippantly, because they're obese, because they have diabetes or hypertension, and they have comorbidities, and they're above age. All right, you're dead. Forget you. How heartless could you see the patients, the families of these people, and they can't even see them. In the past, they couldn't even go close to their bodies. They can't be at the funeral because only 5 allowed at the funeral. You know how painful that is? The Prime Minister himself experienced the pain of that. So come on, man. The government has to shake up. You have to put bright minds in it, and you don't seem to have it. You don't seem to have the capacity, whether it's in education and health. These are the two cornerstones and the fundamental pillars of any civilized society. So I hope I have answered Mr. Aguba's question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopi Singh, for an in-depth and an animated discussion on healthcare and on education. He'll come back to answer some of your questions. We thank you for being in our audience, an ever-growing audience. We have a number of people in Trinidad and Tobago, some abroad. We acknowledge those in the US, in the Caribbean, in Canada, and other places in Europe, and so on. We have quite a number of viewers. We thank you very much. If you're on Zoom, we ask you to turn on your video, and we also urge you to send questions. At the end of the panel presentations, we'll have those questions posed. We have a number of those questions. We acknowledge them, and we wish to tell you we will pose those questions as we go on. Now, we have one of our panelists remotely. He is really one of the Caribbean's finest thinkers and an expert on all things economic and trade and so on. Dr. Claudius Prevel He's an economist, a trade negotiator, a trade policy advisor for more than 23 years. He has professional experience in international trade, trade development, trade policy and negotiations. His PhD is in economics of development, and he has, as I indicated before, he has worked with the WTO, EPA, CARIFORUM, EU, and several other organizations in the formulation and implementation of trade policy and related matters. He is one of the Caribbean's real finest thinkers. I consider him a Caribbean Renaissance man, and we are really honored to have him. Now, before you think this is just an intellectual and academic, I want to tell you really he's a Caribbean man in every sense. And like me, and I imagine others here and elsewhere, he has a great appreciation for Miss Kanhai's roti on Western Main Road in St. James, right? So remember that, Dr. Prevel. So you're a real Caribbean man, you're one of us, and we haven't seen you here for a little while, of course, because of COVID. We know we'll see you soon in person, and we'll again trek down to St. James. But in the meantime, we look very much to the presentation of one of the Caribbean's finest, certainly in economics, in trade matters, Dr. Claudius Prevel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Honorable Dr. Rudal Munilal, MP for Oropouche East, Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, Dr. Alan Sami, and Mr. Tarak Bubuka. Other distinguished guests, members of Oropouche East constituency, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to have been invited by the Honorable Minister, Honorable Member, I should say, for Oropouche East, to share some thoughts with you on the Caribbean economy with reference to Trinidad and Tobago economy as to prepare for the budget. I am honored. I have had a chance to listen to some of the earlier submissions by colleagues, and I find all of it so very interesting. Although I will speak mostly on economic issues, but I probably will just touch very briefly on COVID, because I just listened to Dr. Gopi Singh speak at length about the COVID-19 pandemic and the Trinidad and Tobago situation. I could say briefly in the case of St. Lucia that so far we have had a very effective strategy. We've had a total of 27 COVID cases recorded on island, of which, frankly, all of them have been imported, so they're not, it's not domestically spreading or anything like this. Those 27 cases, we've had a 100% recovery rate, and we have to date 0 deaths. So we've managed it very well. And just to share a little bit of information, I think perhaps one of the things that was effective was, from the onset, we did a lockdown, and the social distancing protocols were very, very full, and the general population complied. So I don't really give the credit so much to the administration as to the cooperation of members of the public. But notwithstanding, we had a good experience, and probably one of the things that might be helpful or useful for the government to do is to take, have a sit down with probably the existing administration here and get a sense of exactly what they did and how they did it, to improve. Okay, that's just my tidbit. I'm not a doctor in medicine, so I don't go into this thing in any detail. I just wanted to drop this footnote as I began my presentation. But I will touch a little bit on the Caribbean economic profile and the Caribbean economic performance prior to COVID-19. I will say a few things about the main drivers of Caribbean economic growth, what I see as economic challenges for the Caribbean since COVID-19. I will speak briefly on the Trinidad government, the issue of increasing taxes and trying to introduce new taxes in the economy, and the state of the Caribbean tourism sector, because that's the sector that has been hit the hardest throughout this COVID experience. And of course, the importance of government investment in information and communications technologies in general, especially in the context of the new future of work, because work as we know it will not be the same in the years ahead. So we have to now strategize. My own little bit of advice to this consultative body on the budget is to think along the lines of the future of work, where your population is concerned in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so first of all, briefly, the Caribbean economic profile, just to say that the gross national income, right, which is really one of the big measures of wealth, the gross national income per capita in CARICOM countries vary from about 800 US to over 30,000 US. So it's quite a lot of variance there. But Trinidad and Tobago is one of those countries way up there with per capita GNI in the vicinity of about 17,000, 18,000 US dollars. So it says something a lot about your country. Some countries rely heavily on commodity exports, others rely more on tourism. I'll talk about that in a little more detail shortly. To put things in context, the GDP for CARICOM in 2019, last published numbers, about 81.9, almost 82 billion US. And CARICOM as a whole have a per capita GDP of about 4,400 US dollars per capita GDP. Trinidad and Tobago has the lion's share of CARICOM GDP. It's about 37% of the GDP of CARICOM is in Trinidad and Tobago. So it makes you a very important center for producing wealth, and also important center for trade and in fact trade polarization can and will take place in Trinidad and Tobago. Another point I want to highlight is the fact that Trinidad, your GDP in 2018 was about 23.8 billion US, with a per capita GDP of about 17.1 billion. So 17,100 USD. So we see that there is some convergence between the GNI, the gross national income per capita, and the GDP per capita, which is very good. It says that a lot of the production translates somehow into national income in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, in terms of the Caribbean economic performance before the COVID-19 pandemic, I had a look at a report by the IDB, and according to them, recent estimates, average economic growth for countries that are members of the IDB has decreased slightly from about 1.5% in 2018 to 1.4% in 2019. So growth has not been robust, and we've had a slight decline even before COVID-19 pandemic hit. For 2020, the report was predicting at the time that economic growth would have been around 1%, which is again even a lot less than the 1.4% for 2019. And that was prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, okay? The only exception the IDB isolated from this is Guyana. With the newfound resources of oil and gas, they were projecting growth of about 80% for Guyana in 2020. We're not clear exactly where those numbers will land now, given the COVID-19 pandemic, and Guyana has a fairly, if I may say, unmanageable situation now with COVID-19. Hopefully, it is contained and managed so that there will be more production in the economy. An interesting footnote also from the same report is this one from ECLA, is that in 2019, the fastest growing economy in the Caribbean was a small economy called Dominica. And that was growing very fast because of tourism and citizenship by investment, sale of passports. It grew by 9% in 2019 relative to 2018. I'll come back to that later because I'm pointing to you on the one hand, the tourism performance of small Caribbean economies like Dominica, and of course St. Lucia is not far behind that. But on the other hand, the performance of larger economies like Guyana and Trinidad, and the issue of vulnerability. Where do you go now when a pandemic like COVID has hit? And do we prepare ourselves for similar future pandemics? There is talk in the United States of a second wave of coronavirus. There's the same talk in Europe. And in fact, while on this point, European economies are in a state of flux. The UK, from time to time, we see COVID is increasing and then it's decreasing. In Germany and France, the same. So it's not clear if they've really found a formula to manage COVID-19. Interestingly, Sweden seemed to have had the best formula for COVID-19 among the European countries. And that entailed not really having a full lockdown. Okay? So the jury is out as to what is working very well. Small St. Lucia, we had a lockdown and we had some intensive social distancing measures. It has worked 100%. So now we're COVID-free, we have no problems. Norway, Sweden, sorry, has done the other extreme. No lockdown, but again, they had a few deaths, they had a lot of COVID-19. But compared to the European nations, they are doing very well. I want to say a few points about the main drivers of economic growth before I go into the challenges COVID-19 posing to the exposure to the Caribbean. For economic growth, the main sectors we have seen for Trinidad and Tobago, of course, oil and gas and manufacturing. These are the two very buoyant sectors for Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, it goes without saying, as you know even better than I do, gas prices have plunged down to $20 a barrel and even less in the past few months, the past year in general, and that has been catastrophic for revenues in the oil and gas sector. And that has impacted, of course, government revenues in the economy. The other main drivers of growth, I've already mentioned tourism for economies like Dominica and its performance, but of course, the same applies to Barbados, St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Kitts, Nevis. All the smaller economies rely very heavily on tourism. Agriculture for some, like Belize, is still doing a lot of agricultural production and agricultural value-added production because they have the resources, they have the land for it. And services in other sectors like telecoms, other sectors like distribution, professional services. And I want to talk about some of those in a little more detail because in terms of the way forward, I think what we're seeing is that Trinidad and Tobago has done extremely well with oil and gas, especially in the years back to around 2015 or so, when you had better prices. The trouble is that as long as you're dealing with commodities like these, oil, as good as oil is a primary commodity. And unless you reinvest the resources strategically, and unless you ensure you diversify the skills of your employment base, you may very well find that there is a net outflow of resources and that government spending at the end of the day still exceeds government revenue, causing government to go and borrow, and this is a problem. I'll say a little more about government's borrowing a little bit later. Now, what have been some of the economic challenges to the Caribbean since COVID? Looking at what the World Bank, the IMF, and a few others have been saying, one of the points that stand out, right, is that COVID-19 for sure is going to have a massive negative impact on economic growth. Right? One World Bank report is suggesting that the Caribbean economy is going to contract by 1.8% in 2020, right, and up to 3.1%, right, when Guyana is excluded, right. So that's one projection. We have at country levels different levels of projections. We are seeing for St. Lucia there is a projection of about -10 to -16% because of COVID-19. Grenada is about in the region of -8%. The ECCB area as a whole in the region of about -4.5%, -6%. Those numbers are not final, of course. There are many assumptions built into the models that have been used to produce those numbers. The jury is out exactly what impact COVID is going to have on economic growth. What is very clear, though, is that the sub-region will be hurt, is already hurting, will be hurt very hard by falling tourism and remittance inflows because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that if, for example, I know Tobago is doing extremely well in tourism, But if we had to look at tourism as an alternative to boost revenues, I would say you have to be very cautious how you proceed in that COVID setting. In terms of economic challenges, another issue we have Caribbean-wide is the extreme weather events that are, and it's very, very well known, the hurricanes and tropical storms that ravage the Caribbean economies every year. We experienced 3 major Category 5 hurricanes between 2017 and 2019. Okay? And I don't have to go into those in detail, but of course, when a hurricane strikes, it can wipe out an entire GDP of a country like St. Lucia, Dominica overnight. So this is a serious vulnerability question. And it raises the other question is, what of the blue economy, right? Sustainable use of the ocean resources. The ocean is there, is supposed to be our ally. What is being done to harness the ocean resources in our favor as a people and not against ourselves? All right, so these are some of the points I want to raise on economic challenges with COVID-19. Now, a little bit on Trinidad and Tobago, government's idea to increase taxes and introduce new taxes. I want to approach this from a pure economist perspective, right? We have the famous Keynesian equation, which tells us the GDP of an economy is a function of consumption, investment, government spending, and the net trade flows, okay? So if consumption is positive, if people are spending money in the economy, GDP goes up. If investment is being done, whether it's foreign or local investment, the GDP goes up. If government spends whatever it spends on, the GDP goes up. And if the net trade flows are positive, meaning if exports exceed imports, again the GDP goes up. Okay? So in any situation, government spending has to be done, and that always results in a boosting of the aggregate demand of the economy and output, and therefore you'll have economic growth increasing. But taxes, on the other hand, when they are imposed, what they do, they reduce aggregate demand, and they discourage domestic production and output. So the economy shrinks. Okay, so this is a fact, whether you are a PNM government or UNC government, you can't run away from this. You impose high taxes, you will shrink the economy. You relax taxes, you provide an incentive to manufacturing and business, you will increase your GDP. Now, the public sector debt to GDP ratio in Trinidad and Tobago is already some 77.6%. Right? So you are now anywhere beyond 60% debt to GDP ratio, puts you in a category of vulnerability that you may not be able to sustain the repayment of your debt in the long term. Okay? So there is a need to increase the GDP and reduce the reliance on foreign debt. Because right now the government is contracting too much external debt to meet, to finance the fiscal gap that is present on an annual basis. Interestingly, I saw some numbers from the report by Finance Minister Con Imber in preparation for this consultation. There is the issue also of falling international reserves. $9 billion signals the need to reduce taxes even further to boost the production at a time when prices are exceptionally low. Because Trinidad and Tobago is a very efficient economy. I'm talking about the private sector, very efficient in production. Electricity cost is very low, and cost of production is typically very low, certainly compared to the rest of the Caribbean states. And in the past, this has been leveraged very effectively to result in a trade surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. More needs to be done in this area to ensure that you can boost international reserves, especially now that oil and gas prices are very low. So government, I'm saying in other words, government has to signal and shift its focus away from just the oil gas area to look at other sectors where there are opportunities to grow the economy and to increase equity in the distribution of wealth in the economy. Expenditure must be disciplined in line with the revenues that are coming in. I looked at some of the numbers from the same report by Minister Kong, and I saw that revenue numbers in 2020 way down, and we know why, COVID-19, but expenditure is even higher than what it was in 2019. So again, this sort of scenario cannot be sustainable, it has to be revisited. There has to be a boost in production of other goods and services as a means to increase total revenue, right? Because the government wants to increase revenue. The target cannot be oil and gas. It has to be to look at other areas, because oil taxes are now exceptionally low, and non-oil taxes are increasing. Okay, so if I look at taxes attributable to value added and income tax, these are on an increasing trend. But those to do with oil and gas, they are actually declining quite rapidly. Now, Dr. Munilal asked me to say something brief about the Caribbean, the state of the Caribbean tourism sector, because this is something that, of course, there's a lot of talk about, as all the hotels and restaurants and other entities connected to the tourism sector feel the pinch of the COVID-19 virus. Some 25.6 million tourists come to the Caribbean a year. In 2018, there were about 26.7 million tourists in the Caribbean. But the numbers are down. If you compare to 2017 we had about 36.7 million tourists come to the Caribbean. So it says that even without COVID-19, for whatever reason, we will not be seen as the most attractive region for tourists globally. 9.1 million international tourist arrivals in the region in the first three months of 2019 represent at least 970,000 visitors to the Caribbean overall. And these are just to give you an indication of the numbers we are looking at. In terms of the cruise sector, there was a jump of about 9.9% in cruise passengers coming to the Caribbean, reaching a record 10.7 million people. All right? But what is going on there? Should Caribbean countries be targeting more of the cruise type of tourism or more of the stayover type of tourism? Right? And the obvious answer is the stayover type tourism. Because tourism itself is a sector characterized by very, very high leakages. Monies are paid to travel operators, tour operators in the United States, in Europe, etc. And a portion of that money is sent, remitted to the hotels in the countries where the tourists will visit. Okay? So, while on our books, in terms of the balance of payments, it may appear as if we are receiving massive revenues from tourism annually. It could actually be just a decoy, because a lot of that money is not actually entering our own economies. It is retained in the United States, Europe, etc., and only a small portion is sent by the multinational companies to St. Lucia, to Trinidad, to Antigua, etc., to finance the operations of tourism in those locales. The cruise ships, I think, are even worse in many ways, because most of the successful cruise ship operations are all-inclusive operations. So the cruise ship lands, and very often the tourists do not spend a single dollar in the country where they are visiting. Everything has been paid for and is being enjoyed on the cruise ship. This model of tourism makes no sense. Okay? And not to mention, the cruise ships are the most notorious containers of COVID virus, as we have seen the world over. So it's not a way to go for us at all in the Caribbean setting. So tourism policies post-COVID-19, what should governments be thinking of? I think there should be more production in the local economy to sustain the demand for tourists. The demand that tourists, whenever they do come, extra-regional tourists, there should be more domestic production in the local economy. It's big lessons there for even countries like Antigua and Barbuda now moving to agriculture to some extent. More concessions to support that should come from domestic businesses. The domestic businesses should become the center for the concessions to stimulate the tourism economy. And there is a need to refocus from extra-regional sources to regional sources. Why are we putting all this effort on attracting tourists from the United States and Europe and other things? Yes, they may have more dollars to spend, but what about the actual tastes and the demand? What about regional integration and synergy? I think the regional market for tourism is quite buoyant, it's quite huge, and more has to be focused on the resources that government spend on tourism to boost the regional tourism economy. And of course, there should be a focus on extracting more value added from the sector to spend the sector spending into the local economies. Okay? I use examples, for example, the cruise ship again. There's no point to bring a cruise ship to St. Lucia, in my view, with 5,000 people on board that will stay on board the cruise ship the entire day and not spend $1 in the country. What about causing them to come get off the cruise ship and go and get a sulfur bath, go somewhere and get a massage with sulfur mud? Similar concepts could be done in the case of Tobago and other Caribbean countries involved in tourism. Now, I want to touch on two more points before I see my time is fast going away, but I want to touch on two important points, and they are related. One is to do with the future of work, and the second is to do with the government's policy that has to be in place to enable and support the future of work. Okay? Work as we know it in the world is changing, right? Work is changing. What we do in traditions were recruited, they went to the firm, they spent 8 hours in the firm, did the production there, and they go home in the afternoon, right? More and more with things like COVID-19, and if that's going to persist for the next couple of years, some experts in the airline industry, for example, they are predicting the world will not return to normalcy under COVID-19 until the year 2025. Okay, and if it's 2025, we're talking about somewhere way out there into the future, right? Well, what does it mean for the future of work? More production will be done remotely than is being done now, first of all. Secondly, to the extent that specific activities can be automated, they will be subjected to computer algorithms and programmed into robots to be done, right? So third, what follows there is the implicit notion of artificial intelligence. More artificial intelligence will become the norm in the way work is done. Fourth, especially in relation to what we call Mode 1 activity of supplying services. Mode 1 means the cross-border supply of services, staying in your jurisdiction and supplying a service to a consumer in a foreign jurisdiction. That is Mode 1. As a matter of fact, what I am now doing is Mode 1 because I am providing advice to Dr. Mueller's team via the internet. This is a Mode 1 type service. More of these kinds of service is what will be required to generate income and revenue for economies. Okay? So with this, what we are seeing now is that the world is transitioning into what they call a gig economy. The gig economy is really and truly a setup whereby employees will become less and less attached to a particular employer. Employers will be more or less contracting employees on a demand basis. I have a specific assignment, I want a specific thing done, I hire you in, you come in, you provide the services, and once once the project is completed, you disband the team and the gig moves somewhere else. This is the model that is being rolled out now in the United States and in some countries in Asia and gradually into the European Union. Okay? And if this is the future of work, the points I made before, robotics, artificial intelligence, gig economy, if this is where we are going, then government today must invest in information communication technologies at the various levels in schools to support this new world of work we're moving. So ICT is the way forward because it will facilitate new types of economic activity on the mode one, as I mentioned before. The second point is that we do not know how long the COVID-19 type situation will persist. So the moves must be made to secure other forms of income and work for your citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And one of those, of course, is via the ICT and using platforms like Zoom, Google Meet, Skype, you name it, to deliver services across the internet. Generation Z and the millennials, they are very, very different people from myself and Dr. Mundil, did our PhDs in order to get. I can tell you something. There is a seamless interface between Gen Z and millennials and the machine. Okay? I have a son of 7 and a son of 10. And you give them a tablet device, and it's like, you know, without a manual, there's no need for a manual, they know exactly what to do. They know what button to push, they know where to get a particular query answered, etc. It's almost like they are born with a machine attached to them. Okay? Government has to understand that the demand for education and training has changed and is changing even more. And therefore, more investment has to be made in the appropriate information communication technology apparatus to support the economy and to support the future of work, which is really going to be more ICT type enabled, gig economy oriented. Okay, I think I have given you a mouthful. I had 15 minutes, Mr. Moderator. And I would really appreciate some of your views and comments on what I have suggested here. I want to thank you very much and look forward to a very rich discussion with Dr. Mundil and his team. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claudius Prevail, speaking to us from lovely St. Lucia. Thank you very much, Doc. I found it, as indeed I'm sure everyone else, to be a most stimulating discussion. I liked your input on the economy, the regional economy, tourism, but I was particularly fascinated about your discussions on the world of work. If you have writings on these, and I'm sure you do, if you can let us know, and I know we have a large audience, especially a youth audience, and we could always point to that. But this was a most stimulating discussion. Dr. Claudius Prevail, who like me has a great fondness for Ms. Kanhai Roti. We thank you very, very much. You made a most valued contribution. I'm sure we'll get questions. I hope you stand by and probably take a couple of those questions. Thank you again for being with us. For our audience, you are with us. We are in the Office of the Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, and we thank you very much. We thank the members of the media. We have some members here, and we have some online with us. If you're with us on Facebook or on Zoom, kindly file questions. We have a bundle of them. We'll try to get through as many as we can. We have an audience that includes people in Trinidad and Tobago, in the wider Caribbean, North America and elsewhere. We have one more panelist, and then we will get to your question. Thank you again for being with us. Well, we are to the point of the host of today's event. Dr. Rudal Munilal has been he was from 2010 to 2015 the Minister of Housing and Urban Development. He was also the leader of the House. He used to tell us he is the leader of every house in the country except his own. He has been a member of parliament for Oropouche East since the year 2002. He served prior to that in the Senate. He has tremendous experience in governance. More than that, Dr. Munilal has an LLB in law. He has a bachelor's degree, he has a master's degree from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, and he's the first student to have graduated cum laude, and he also has his PhD in matters of development, employment, and those things. And all of it have been most applicable to his tenure in public life. He is really one of the Caribbean's finest thinkers, and he has a tremendous checklist of accomplishments as a Minister of Government. I, for one, am very anxious to get his input ahead of Monday's budget presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rudal Munilal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. When you go to address a virtual meeting, you can't help but acknowledge that you get a ripple of applause. And it is not because the audience don't appreciate you. It is because there is no live audience. So I begin by welcoming all to our Debe constituency office and thanking you for welcoming me in your homes, at your place of work, your place of recreation, in your car, in some cases, and wherever you might be. It is the sign of the times that we meet in virtual land to have an important discussion on policy, economics, health, education, and so on. I want to acknowledge, as I begin, this extremely sound and technically advanced panel that we have had the pleasure of hearing this evening. This debate so far, this discussion, has been of a very, very high level. And we are extremely happy, and I want to thank Dr. Alan Sami, Encyclopedia of Knowledge on Local Government and Development Studies. Dr. Sami will not be a person by definition and by character. He is not one to trumpet his cause, but I can tell you, he is a development thinker, a progressive researcher, and a man of sound academic and intellectual substance. And today you heard it in his presentation. I will come to a couple points that he raised earlier. Our young friend, former Senator Obika, gave an extremely important, technically sound presentation. He is one of the finer young economists of our time, and I was happy that at our virtual land here, I was happy to have this interface between former Senator Obika and Dr. Claudius Preville, who is today a leading economist in the Caribbean and in the CARICOM region, so that two economists can meet and hear themselves give figures and statistics with sound intellectual and policy overtones. And to hear Senator Obika and Dr. Preville in one seminar, I think is a joy to hear them. They will not bring laughter to you, and they will not bring fun, but what they will bring to you is the essence of budgeting, of economic and social challenges of the day. And I think in a budget seminar and consultation, this is very important. We conceptualize today, it is not a parliamentary meeting, it is not political speeches as such, but really to get clarity on issues and to raise policy issues. Dr. Gopi Singh, I don't know what else could be said, is a mind, an intellect, a statesman, a policy maker, a manager, a cricketer, par excellence. And in him, this country has one of the proudest sons of Trinidad and Tobago that has excelled in academia, in medicine, in health, in education, in sports, and someone with a vast amount of knowledge that Trinidad and Tobago can still benefit from in the years ahead. So Dr. Gopi Singh, thank you for coming here today. This afternoon, I won't be too long because it is always our intention to have our visiting speakers, our visiting fellows, speak and give us the benefit of their experiences, their research, and their thinking. But I will raise just one or two, for me, new issues, because I agree with my colleagues and I don't want to certainly not to repeat anything that they have said, but to endorse a couple points. And Dr. Sami made an important point. He said, you know, we talk about budgeting and we talk about money. And all of us, you know, we hear in 48 hours from now, you will hear Minister Imbert rattle off 200 million, 300 million, 40 million, 800 million, 1.2 billion. All of that will be rattled off. But what does it really mean? Did it mean that the people who need drainage, did they get the drainage? The people who need to fix their road, did they get that? The people who need water, did they get that? The people who need health care, did they get that? And during the seminar, I just want to read something very briefly for you from my own messages, you know. During a virtual encounter, we receive a lot of feedback on the WhatsApp and on our devices. So many of us, including you now, will be monitoring devices and so on. And I was monitoring my device, of course, and I was hearing from people who said, well, the volume was too low, it was too high. Could I ask this question? I'm hearing Dr. Gopi Singh. And somebody sent me a text. And I am reading this along with all the other messages, Dr. Sami. And this message go like this, just about 10 minutes ago. Good afternoon, sir. How are you? I hope all is well at this time. I would like to ask you, on behalf of a friend of mine, if you or anyone can assist a child in purchasing or obtaining a computer or a tablet that will assist her with her online classes. Her mother is a single parent and is hardly working since the COVID pandemic. Your assistance would be greatly appreciated. Why I read that for you is because, as Dr. Prevel said, we have to marry policy with problem. We cannot just elaborate on exhilarating policy and strategy, but policy is not connected to problem. That is the problem I read. The problem is the mother who is crying out for a device for the child to learn. How do we provide for that? And many years ago, a colleague reminded me, I think it was the Pandey administration, if I'm not wrong, had a soft loan for public servants in the first instance for computers, laptop technology and so on. And maybe we should recommend immediately that the government provides soft loans for parents, whether they be public officers in local government, in central government, elsewhere, to obtain immediately tablets and laptops and other devices for the children to adjust, as Dr. Prevel announced the importance of that earlier. Now, when I heard this, my first reaction was, but if people not working, where they get money to pay back a loan? But we are not in 2000 now, we are not in 1995. Today, a device that might be needed would be how much dollars? $2,000, more or less. 2,000. And if you do that over 24 months, how much money? I always look to the former member for Caroni East. 2,000 over 24 months is how much? $80-something a month maybe. So you ask someone to pay $84 a month for a tablet for their child. So we recommend immediately some type of intervention to provide soft loans for parents that can pay $84 a month for a tablet or a device for their children. And that is the response we start with, because we must get policy for problem. Don't have policy and there's no problem. And when you have problem, you can't find policy. The other matter I come to concern entertainment. And let me begin by extending our deepest condolences to the family and friends of a former dear brother of ours, Mr. Dennis Sprangalang Hall, who has been very close to many of us in the political field. He was an entertainer, a great friend, a supporter, and I don't mean supporter in the political sense, but a supporter of those who provide for people. He was a Southerner, in fact a very proud Southerner. People would know, Naparima community would know he was a very proud Southerner. And I'm hoping as we go along, we extend condolences to the family. But I'm hoping that the government, and it must be government in the first instance, would find a fitting tribute to this great son of the soil who has dedicated his life to the entertainment sector. Something else happened recently in the entertainment sector. Another colleague that we are aware of, and a pioneer in the field of multimedia expression, actor, comedian, and so on, was thrown out of his house. He was on the street. So you had one battling with life and one thrown out on the street, and that is life-threatening as well in that sense. With the help of Good Samaritans, some of whom I know personally as well, the Good Samaritans, he was able to save that. But it is a good time to think of the entertainment sector, to think, how can we help this? And I come back to Dr. Preville as well and Senator Obika. I felt good today, Dr. Preville, that my intellectual and academic life is coming full circle, because I started off with the world of work and employment studies, and now where I am, that has become the issue of the day. There was a time when employment and industrial relations was not a sexy issue. You know, it wasn't the issues of the day. People wanted to talk about other things that were important. But today, the world has come around to where I started 20-something years ago, the future of work. It is now online. It is remote learning. It is online learning. It is working from home, or working not necessarily from home. You could be working from anywhere. Not your home. Could be somebody else's home. But employment now has come full circle, and we are now discussing the world of work, the future of work. And the future of work is clearly remote, IT driven, online. That is the future of work, and it is the future of the provision of services and goods. And I will make examples because you can see what is happening. People ask me, they say, Rudy, you study employment your whole life, you have been an academic in the employment area. What will happen? And I told them that although every 100 years or so you might get a pandemic, we have had crashes in the world economy that has undermined work as we know it. So what will happen in the future of jobs will be increasingly IT driven. Claudia said that. It will be people, believe it or not, in delivery. Today, anything you want, whether you want a sip of water, whether you want a suit, whether you want food, whether you want anything for the home, it is delivered. So delivery will become a big issue for employment, for sapping labor. Delivery. Food, drinks, people will still drink. People will still consume food, notwithstanding lower incomes. So that the challenges we face now will create jobs. There's a new job creating area. That job creating area is linked to health and hygiene. So there is now a subsector in the wider health sector that will deal with the provision of what is called hygienic services and goods. So people are calling you now. They now have new spraying devices where they load your sanitizer or other goods as well in that. So when you go through you come to an office now, somebody meet you, they say, welcome, you are in the bank. They just spray you up and down within 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And the spray gun is being sold, a nice, elegant looking device. The liquid for that is being sold in mass. So new jobs are being created to link to the health sector, dealing with maintaining the hygiene of this time, and that will continue. In the foreseeable future, people will not stop washing their hands. Even when the world is fully vaccinated, people will continue washing their hands, they will continue hand sanitizing. In fact, they will be very fearful. People will be very fearful of coming close and not socially distancing, even after the vaccine is found. So there are jobs of the future in the health and hygienic sector, in the delivery sector linked to services generally and goods. These are areas that we can look forward to. The other area, of course, I wanted to get in and talk briefly on was this entertainment. When we were in office, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa and her government had a vision. She had this vision and shared the vision, and we invested in vision. You see, one of the problems we have is that propaganda only takes you so far. Propaganda is a tool for something else, for some type of agenda, but it only takes you for propaganda. Don't help you to develop the economy by 0.0001%. Propaganda don't help. It is policy will help. It is program will help. Had the government before succeeded in sandals in Tobago, the sandals project I'll talk about. It was a scandal, but it was sandals. Had they succeeded in that, Dragonfield, new industrial estate at Point Lisas, if those mega foreign direct investment projects had succeeded, you would have had some diversification. We were never against those projects per se. We were against the method, the process. We call for we call for accountability. We call for transparency. That's all. Because the Dragonfield, truth be told, it was the former partnership government that was involved in developing dialogue with the Dragonfield, what is called the Loran Manatee Fields, I believe. We did work in that. We did work in that sector. It was a foreign the administration before that had a project to develop Maracas Beach. Mrs. Prasad Bisesa had this vision to develop medical tourism and sports tourism. Medical and sports. And that is why we invested money, enormous money, in the cycling velodrome, in the swimming center, in the tennis center in Tacarigua. That is why we invested there. That is why we invested in the Couva Hospital, the Arima Hospital, the Point Fortin Hospital, the San Fernando Teaching Hospital. You saw where the money went, huh? It was because we believe that it is hard, Dr. Preville, for Trinidad and Tobago to compete immediately and outrun St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Dominica, Barbados, Jamaica, and so on. It is hard for Trinidad and Tobago to jump in the tourism race and win. We believe that we could have jumped in the tourism of medical, sports, and win. Because we had the infrastructure, we had the open economy. This government, of course, had different ideas. But a new sector is now here. And I want to say that we agree, we cannot disagree with the government's position that given the crisis we face, that the carnival as we know it, Carnival 2021 as we know Carnival to be, ought to be shelved. We cannot disagree with that. But Mrs. Prasad Bisesa on Monday last made an important policy announcement that we should think of a virtual carnival. Today, the IPL is being played in the United Arab Emirates with a global viewership of a billion people, I believe. They have no spectators there. Recently, the CPL was played 10 minutes from this office. No audience, no spectator. Highly successful financially as well. Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, as Mrs. Prasad Bisesa said, can be virtual, in which you take all the art forms, calypso, soca, extempo, pan, king of the bands, queen of the bands, and you can decentralize that throughout Trinidad and send your judges to judge and provide prizes. So the creative people continue to work. The creative people continue to work. And in the entertainment sector, Trinidad and Tobago has, I think, Trinidad and Tobago has an advantage in the entertainment sector. We are known, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica and other areas too, but we are defined by calypso, by chutney, by steel band, tassa and so on. We are defined by that. And in the entertainment sector, we are defined by that, and it is high time that this government outlines some type of plan to support the entertainment sector. And you can do that in honor of Sprang Alam, who passed away recently. You can do that. So that you provide policy and a supportive policy framework to support entertainers in providing their services and goods. And they can do that even virtually by way of producing music, because when you're producing music, you're in studio and so on, you don't have a lot of people, and you can produce music for the world market. In fact, our virtual carnival is in some cases, it might be more dynamic for the global audience than the traditional carnival. And that is something that the government should be dealing with. I think the time has come in terms of history and given the immediacy of this matter, to focus on support for the entertainment industry, which also generates foreign exchange, and scarce foreign exchange at a time like this. When you're crying out that you don't have foreign exchange and the price of oil and gas low, you have an entertainment sector that can generate foreign exchange. By the inputs, and by the output, certainly by the output. And that is something that we should do. So the government ought to outline a plan for how we are to ensure that our national art forms survive the COVID pandemic by a strategy of investment in the entertainment sector. And the entertainment sector, people don't know. We look sometimes at entertainment and we say, that is somebody by a mic singing. That is a dancer. There are downstream and upstream linkages in entertainment. People sew clothes. People do the technical part of music. There are several integrated sectors in entertainment. And that is something I believe that we should look at, and we should ask the government to look at solidly, apart from other sectors. Certainly, the COVID pandemic will not destroy medical tourism. Because if someone is ill, God forbid, and they are with life-threatening diseases, COVID don't change that. If you, God forbid, you have problems with your heart, cancer, kidney, liver, and so on, COVID don't change that necessarily. You still have to take treatment, so you still have to travel. And this government ought to reconsider the approach of the partnership administration to medical tourism, and eventually to sports tourism, where you can have spectator-less events. And the entertainment sector, of course, I spoke of that as a major source of foreign exchange, direct foreign exchange. The other matter, and I think, again, people talk about that before, so I don't want to talk about it, is really a crying shame, and we are extremely grateful to Blue Waters, Courts, and Marshall Montano that they have embarked on this program of giving out devices and so on. But it is a shame that we have reached a point where we must now ask the private sector and entertainers to donate devices when you had a policy of providing laptops for children in the secondary school. That was quashed. It was quashed, and today we now have to call on the private sector, call upon leaders in the entertainment sector to provide for the children. How much will you provide? A principal told me on the way here today, he said the ministry, they are in a government school, Dr. Sami, and they don't have devices. The children at their homes, given their social, economic status and condition, they don't have devices. The principal says the ministry sent 25 rolls, of paper for photocopying to get these assignments to the student, only to be told that the school don't have a photocopy machine. That is the problem we face. You don't have a photocopy machine, but you send 20 reams of paper to send out assignments. You had a proposal before of the laptop, and you threw that down the drain. The other matter I spoke about earlier in the week has been dealt with sometime. I don't want to develop, but we have an asset that is being depleted, an asset that is left to idle. Therefore, millions and millions of US dollars will be needed. Any entity that takes hold of the refinery at Pointe-à-Pierre will have to spend what we estimate to be 800 million United States dollars to get it working again. That is money we could have had in the bag. When we invested in the refinery in Pointe-à-Pierre, when the Manning administration, both the Manning and the Prasad-Bissessa's administration, invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery, it was closed, and today we have to go for hundreds of millions of dollars to reopen it. What economic sense is that? We were also targeting Guyana. We had the economic intel that Guyana was going to strike gold, so to speak, in oil and gas. And today, we would have been in a point where Guyana could readily send oil to be refined and for the petroleum products to be manufactured, produced in Trinidad and Tobago with the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery. That was always the plan. That plan collapsed. Today, Other countries in the world have moved into Guyana to take their crude, to take the oil, and produce petroleum products, while Trinidad and Tobago is on your doorstep and could have been the regional and hemispheric leader with the production of petroleum products emanating out of raw material of Guyana. So, without a vision, the country will perish. And today, we are calling on the Minister of Finance to show some vision. And the Minister of Finance has to be heartless at a time like this to even contemplate property tax and so on. But you have to be, the Minister of Finance called me, remember, I know you for many years. I'm eager to do an X-ray on you to see if there's a heart. Because you have to be heartless to be thinking of imposing tax on people who are being chased out of their house. Brothers and sisters, I want to tell you something. Errol Fabian is not the only one. He's the most prominent one because we know him. Every single day people are losing their homes. They cannot pay rent. They cannot buy food. They cannot get books. They cannot get medicine. So you cannot put on these people now a burden of paying property tax. If ever there was a bad time, it is now. In fact, strange enough, the time might have been better before. So that we look forward to the minister saying something on that and to bring in closure one way or another on the point of your refinery matter. I am not here to condemn whether it's Patriotic Energies, whether it is some other potential buyer and so on. We had always asked in the Parliament for transparency and accountability. We wanted no less. The opposition had no horse in the race. It doesn't matter to us whether the Patriotic Energies got it or some other company in Trinidad or somebody abroad and so on. We were about accountability. We were about transparency. That's all. If someone offer you money, just tell us who offer you money, where they get any money from. That's all. Look at the debacle that has happened with this refinery matter that just doesn't seem that it want to go away. And finally, in closing, Mr. Chairman, because I know my time will be up too, in closing, I wanted to say that if we look at the meeting during the week, if we came at the meeting if we look at the spotlight on the budget earlier in the week, you will see that there was an attack on labor, a savage attack on labor. The head of government spent considerable time speaking about the gains of workers during the 2010-2015 period, as if that was a sin, as if settling 134 collective agreements was a sin, as if giving workers an increase in their salary was a sin. That is not a sin. We are proud of that. When people get disposable income, they spend income generally. In our labor market today, when people earn money, they get an increase. That money don't go in Switzerland or in London or in a bank account in Florida. That money generally goes back in the economy. People buy, they purchase. They use more taxi, they use more services. They go to the tailor to make a pants. They go to the barber for a trim. When you get money, you spend money. So we were proud of our record. The Prime Minister, and I warned the population, spoke last week, Monday, as if wage increase was a sin. And we can predict a savage attack on workers to roll back the gains that they got 2010 to 2015. And I warned the government, I warned the Prime Minister, take your hands off the pay package of workers in Trinidad and Tobago. Take your hands off. Because you need workers to have disposable incomes and so on, so that they can go ahead. The Minister of Finance, we expect that he will come with a sledgehammer and swing away. We expect that he will smash and grab from the hard-earned wages of public officers and other officers in the economy. We expect that. We expect the TTRA. We expect the government will want to introduce the Revenue Authority. We expect the opposition will not support the Revenue Authority. So that, to us, is very clear. And in terms of the COVID, I don't want to say much. A lot has been said on that. Clearly, and I agree with our colleague in St. Lucia, the diversification effort needs to be ramped up, and it can't be ramped up if you cannot attract foreign direct investment, mega projects, and you fail to see them through with accountability and transparency. So, Mr. Chairman, I would want to leave it there, and I hope that we can, in the question time, I know we are running very late, but we can take a few questions and get some more issues out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munilal, the host of today's discussion, which is taking place at his office, the Oropouche East Member of Parliament's office in Debe, and his stimulating discussion. We thank him very, very much. We have a horde of questions, thanks to my colleagues who have been collating them, and I would read a few, and I would ask our panelists to come and respond to some of the matters. Mr. Obika, I'll start with you, but before I get there, Ricardo from New York has a comment. It's just a comment. Well, it's a comment, not just. There are several abandoned projects in the Southland from what I noticed for almost 5 years. Most are schools. Now that virtual learning is in progress, this is the perfect time to lobby the government to complete these projects and revitalize the construction industry, which will result in job creation. Well, Ricardo, in addition to that, we could also mention the long abandoned, unfortunate abandonment of the Ramai Trace Hindu school, primary Hindu school, several years, and the distress that school children are facing. Before I ask Mr. Obika, there are two questions, Dr. Sami, from your predecessor as chair of the PDRC, but I will just read them. I know you can't provide answers. One, he says at the crossing at Debe, there's a place, a barbecue shack that has collapsed in some area, and then the drains are filled with debris. His question is, what is the Ministry of Works' plan to solve the flooding? Clearly, you can't provide an answer, but it does highlight the issue and the need for the Ministry of Works to get involved. Former Chairman Suku is asking, why don't councillors receive a pension after serving for several years, and so on. Especially, I see Alderman is applauding here. So I imagine Dr. Sami, you will support that measure, but I don't know that you could bring much added value to that discussion. We have several issues. I want to ask Mr. Obika, arising out of your discussion, especially with respect to the creative industries, some questions. One person, Alpha, and we thank you very much, Alpha. I agree that Carnival 2021 should be cancelled, but what will be the short-term impact of the cancellation of a festival that drives TNT's creative economy? So many of our local creatives, creative artists in culture and so on, the workers and so on in the industry depend on carnivals for survival. What will be the impact on the creative worker? Along with that, there are other questions. I want to integrate all of them and ask for your response. So many of our local creatives and artists and so on, cultural workers depend on carnival for survival. What will be the impact, right? Similar question there. What will be the short term? All right, somebody is also asking a similar question. So, Mr. Obika, several questions are rising from the cancellation of the carnival, the impact on the creative workers. What are your suggestions?
Right. Well, if I have to, thanks, moderator, and thanks for the questions. If I have to answer that, the first challenge that we face in this country is we do not measure properly the sector that is the creative industry. In fact, we don't even have a creative industry policy. That is where we should start. For energy, we have energy policy. For health, we have a health sector policy. For tourism, we have a tourism policy. But we only have a cultural policy which speaks nothing about the industry. It really focuses in the main on protecting and preserving and enhancing the cultural expression. So the first challenge to answer that question is, as a nation, apart from a few studies, for example, from Dr. Keatness, that puts Carnival at $1 billion, we have to assess exactly what is the sector. Who are the workers in the sector? Which manufacturing companies benefit during the time of Carnival, for instance, from increased sales? What is the fallout from the hotel and tourism sector? Because hotels benefit from a Carnival bump that allows them to run empty for other seasons during the year. So unless we first measure, and in the absence of data, the government must have consultations with the sector. The sector will not be hesitant to meet with the government at all, because now is the time that they are under pressure. they would run at any opportunity to meet with the government, as is evidenced by the consultation that TV6, I think, did with media workers, Jules Sobian, Private Ryan et al. So the first step is for us to measure the sector, and that starts with having a creative industry policy. The government must engage the sector. Unless they begin that process, what we are doing here will be an exercise in speculation. So the first thing is to measure the size of the sector.
Mr. Obika, don't take your seat yet. One more question for you on another matter. Nova is asking us, what controls are in place to manage the depletion of our foreign exchange by immigrants sending foreign currency to families abroad?
Remittances is, comes hand in glove with migrant workers. And there will be no other society that knows that best than us in Trinidad, because everybody in Trinidad would have had a classmate, a neighbor, or themselves been the recipient of a barrel. You know, and the days when the barrel mined families in this country. So it would not be spiritually right for us to attack foreigners who send monies to their families, just as we benefited for decades from the 80s come forward from barrels and from funds from family members abroad. What needs to happen is to make sure that locals have access to foreign exchange. The system for administering foreign exchange must be equitable and fair. When the partnership was in office, there were things done to try to bring that level of equity. One can argue which system was better, what happened then versus what happens now. But once you have a dwindling pool of foreign exchange, the only solution is to engage in foreign exchange generation. And that is the real solution to that problem. Once the pool is getting smaller, we'll always have issues with who is benefiting from the pool. We can't say that we benefit from migrant workers, and we don't want them to send money for their children to have milk and sugar, whichever countries they come from. So basically, to me, the solution must lie in managing the access to foreign exchange so that each person can have fair access to it. You may not have all that you may want, but we have better access. But also at the same time, engaging in expansion of markets. We had a wonderful plan for that in Plan 2020. But again, left foot and right foot were chosen. So unless we engage in the manufacturing sector to make advantage of all these trade agreements that we have, for example, with whether it be Panama, Costa Rica, the African, Caribbean, and the African and Pacific countries, unless we maximize these trade agreements and export to these countries, including the cultural and creative sector, we will face a dwindling pool of foreign exchange.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obika. That lovely lady we saw on screen, that's the lady who asked. Her name is Nova Williams. We thank you very much for your question and for all other questions. Kumari keeps reminding me, so I'm going to say we are going to entertain questions from our Zoom audience. Feel free to use the hands up, Charmaine tells me, and we'll entertain your question. Dr. Gopi Singh, a comment and a question on health, an important question on health. The comment on education, it comes from Raymond, whom we know as an outstanding educator in the country. He says that me and also Dr. Gopi Singh said, re-education. Emphasis should be placed on the provision of devices and improvements in connectivity so as to afford students an equal opportunity to access learning. The provision of printed packages leaves schools at a disadvantage since the teaching and learning process is compromised and the teacher/student interactions are impeded. Thank you very much for Raymond. Dr. Gopi Singh, a question here on health. The government and Minister of Health would be responsible for other deaths than COVID-19. At present, I am being rescheduled every month for kidney surgery because the hospital does not have a necrostomy, is that the correct word? A tube N-E-P-H-R-O-S-T-O-M-Y, tube, and they're asking me to purchase this tube. They're asking the person to purchase. I am unemployed. How is this proper health care? Give us your sense on this, Dr. Gopi Singh. And as he comes to the microphone, send your questions. We have limited time. We'll entertain as many as we can.
Well, I don't think the Minister of Health will be responsible for the death of anyone, but he is responsible for the policy formulation and the monitoring of the policies that the ministry has put into place and the effectiveness and efficiency of the policies. And what can the person who asked this question is alluding to the question of the supplies management chain. How is it that a nephrostomy tube, which is put in by the renal surgeon, the urologic surgeon, how is that missing from the system? And this is what the whole question of management comes in. Where is the board? Where is the CEO? Where are the teams of people who did the supplies for the hospital? And then, of course, the question of funding to pay these suppliers. That's a very critical area which the government in itself has to look at very much. So it goes down to lack of management, the lack of capacity and capability, and the lack of accountability by the people who are supposed to be providing the type of management so that supplies like these are not scarce and are not short, so that patients' lives are not in danger, as your life is. I empathize with you. Perhaps there might be some way I might be able to help in the, if you call, and I might be able to put you on to the doctors in the hospital who will probably have to get some nephrostomy tube from another hospital. This is why I talk about the 4 hospitals, the 4 regional health authorities are running over each other with hundreds of workers from one doing the same thing that hundreds of workers doing in another. It's time that that stops so we can get efficient management.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopi Singh. Thank you so much. We have taken just a few more questions. Dr. Munilal, what are you prepared to do if, and this is from Ricky, thank you, Ricky. What are you prepared to do if the government wants to increase the retirement age to 65? You know, that has been some discussion, especially with the state of the NIB and so on. And when you respond, also Shania Polo is asking us, what can the government do to increase revenue? So 2 questions for you.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I'll start with the second question first. The government often projects a particular narrative that is rooted in propaganda that the partnership administration spent on, didn't develop revenue streams and so on. That is completely false. I forgot to say in my earlier presentation, Ken, that Petrotrin paid to the Treasury between 2010 to 2015 $20 billion in taxes, royalties, and other fees and rentals. $20 billion from Petrotrin alone between 2010 and 2015. A few days ago, it went very quiet. If I could tell you, a ship quietly left Labre. 2 or 3 days ago, it made some small little footnote news. It was a plant with energy materials, energy products, leaving Labre at a plant that now finished, that was signed, agreed to, initiated in 2013. So nobody made news out of that. The only way that you can raise revenue is by investment. If there's an investment strike, as there had been between 2015 to 2020, if you have an investment strike, you will not raise revenue. Raising revenue is not just, running a little money for the drain and the road and patching up the road here and there. You have to raise revenue by investment. A prime minister of any country is a prime minister who travels, and when they come back, he or she, they bring investments. and tangible investment that leads to factories, that leads to plant, that leads to employment, that leads to taxation, that leads to all of that prosperity. So you will create revenue by foreign direct investment. And the first issue, it has been a long issue here in this country and in the CARICOM labor market as well, as to increasing the age of retirement. In some areas, retirement go as low as 45 years. People don't know retirement age in certain sectors could be 45 years in the protective services in some strata. But that is a more complex issue. I don't think now is a good time to entertain changing a retirement age, given the real problem in the labor market, which is unemployment, which is job creation. Because if you delay the departure of a group of workers, then you by definition will not lift some, and you will not create employment at the lower level. So that whatever challenges we face, it has to do with creating employment, not keeping employment when retirement comes. Because in several sectors, people do complain that when they reach a certain time for promotion and so on, you call back persons to work, and it has some effect on the existing labor force. So it's a policy issue that has been engaging the CARICOM area for a long time. But I think the other critical issue to that is really job creation. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Munilal. We have a few questions on social media. Joe wants to come in and some others, but I just want to, we'll bring you on in just a little while. I just want to direct two questions to Mr. Obika, two probably related issues. Since there is going to be a deficit, a budget deficit, which ministries should get smaller allocations? Tough question, Mr. Obika. While you're at it, and that is from Dion. Thank you very much, Dion. And Dennis is asking us, do you think we should devalue our national currency? Mr. Obika?
So I'll take the second one first. Which do you think we should devalue our currency? The currency is already devalued, has already been devalued from at least about 10% over the last 5 years. When you consider, even if you consider the rate that they're defending the currency at 6.8, because that is only the official rate, but the rate which businesses have to pay for foreign exchange is significantly in excess of $7 TT to 1 US. In some cases as high as 8. Even more than that. So that's one thing. Currency has already been devalued. The only solution to our forex crisis will be to generate more foreign exchange. Because even if you devalue the currency, what you'll find is you'll get imported inflation. Inflation will rise, cost of living, you'll have social strife, more than what you're having now because of the pandemic. So a devaluation on the face of it is not the solution to the problems. Really generating more foreign exchange is the solution. The other issue in terms of which ministries should get more money, it depends on what is the government's plan. But again, if you plan to generate more rents in a particular ministry to pay for a building on Alexandra Street, or to provide consultancy fees to a particular individual connected to a government minister to build some medical facility in Port of Spain, we know who we are talking about there, or to give more financing favors to another member of the government who would recuse themselves, whose family member is benefiting directly, then that may determine which ministries get more money. But if you actually have a plan to boost education, to transform the creative industry, to generate tourism in whether it may be medical or for education, as Grenada. 25% of Grenada's foreign exchange in some years comes from the medical facility, based on a conversation I had with a former Minister of Finance in Grenada. So even education can generate tourism and foreign exchange, but the government has to care about governance, and then they will be able to prioritize better. Other than that, until then, it's who's getting more money from which ministry that they have to recuse themselves for will determine which ministry gets more under this government. Yeah.
Thank you very much, former Senator Obika. We are coming to the end. We'll take just a few limited questions. We promise you, Joe, you would be next. Joe is on social media. Your comment and or question.
This question is for Dr. Alan Sam.
Dr. Sami? Yeah, okay. Something is not right there with the... Charmaine says we have a bad connection. Could we fix it, or we could go... That can be outside of this. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Externally, Joe. Okay, Joe? Yeah, let's hear Joe. Your question to Dr. Sami. Difficulty again. Could we bring up the next question, maybe from Raymond? Yeah, okay. And we'll take some more, just a few more questions. We know we've been here a long time, and we thank you all, our local and international audience. We thank you very much for being with us, and we thank Dr. Preville for being with us. Raymond is on. Raymond?
Yes, Ken. I would just like to see in the budget if measures could be put in place to create some form of sustainable employment for our young people. We have so many of our young people coming out of high school, universities, technical schools, and are unemployed at this point in time. And as I say this, I would also like to draw your attention to a personal thing that would have happened to me 2 years ago. My daughter was just about 23 years old then, and she was called by the Service Commission Department for a job that she would have applied for 5 years ago. It was her birthday. Her birthday would have been on the Friday. She was called the Wednesday and was asked to report to Service Commission. Unfortunately, we were not able to go on the Friday, which was her birthday, so we went on the Monday following, just Saturday, Sunday, Monday. When she went to the office, she was told that she was 1 day too late. She is over the age of 23, and the public service policy is that you must be 23 and under 23 to be employed. And I found that to be very, very unfortunate, because when we received the call, we were not informed that that was the policy of the Service Commission Department in terms of employing personnel for the public service. So she missed it just by the weekend. And they said, okay, they have passed her opportunity, they will pass her to someone else. And I found that was very, very unfortunate. I'm hoping that the policy could be changed in terms of employment in the public service, and more sustainable jobs could be created so that our young people could find themselves engaged in meaningful practices rather than leading a life of negativity. And we would have seen just recently in this community where one of our young daughters was brutally murdered. If there were things that these young people and programs, even as a member of the YTEP community, I would have left as a center manager at YTEP. And at Ian Secondary, we were serving a useful purpose in training our young people who would have been dropped out of school and all that. We had a lot of programs that we were offering these young people so that they could engage themselves in community practices. We know everybody is not academically inclined. All of these programs are stopped, and hence we are finding there's a social degradation in society, and our young people are getting themselves involved in negative things that is leading to a life of crime and practices that we as older people roll our heads one day ago. So I would really like the government in this budget to address the question of employment and providing opportunities for young people to be meaningfully engaged.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raymond. Well, we could direct that question to any one of our panelists, because we have experts on policy, governance issues, labor, and so on. But I'll ask the former eminent Minister of Education, Dr. Gopi Singh, to share his thoughts on that.
Thank you very much for the question, Raymond. Specifically, when under Mrs. Bissessa's administration, there was a great emphasis by the Minister of Tertiary Education on technical vocational training, and a number of centers which had been dormant before were opened up by Minister Karim under the Mrs. Bissessa's watch. Like YTEP became stronger, NESC, NSDP, a number of these training agencies were put to improve the intake of students. And then there was the relationship between employers and these training agencies, where the employers began to take them, the government paid half of their of their salary, and the employers paid half. And that went strongly. And then accreditation of these people also took place by the accreditation team that was set up by the Ministry of Tertiary Education, so that people with technical vocational skills, as you said, not necessarily academic, were able to pursue further training and become more employable. Also, there was a program by the government, Mrs. Bissesa's government, that graduate students out of the whatever 20 or 25 different ministries, at least 1 million is put for each ministry to employ graduate students and have them trained. So if we had 40 ministries, we have about 40 million put forward there for various people to be employed and in training in their particular ministry. So just these are two examples that took place under Mrs. Bissesa's watch and administration. But when Dr. Rowley's administration came in, well, education really floundered all around. Whether it's tertiary education, whether it's primary or secondary, they made a mess. And there was a swift reversal of all the, and a precipitous reversal of all the gains and successes that were made between 2010 and 2015 in the education sector, affecting employment. And also GATE was closed as well, shortened, so that those who were aspiring to become much more trained today, that was also shortened as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gopi Singh. We have a number of questions, but we've got to bring the session to an end shortly. Madhura Maharaj, I hope I got your first name correct, has a comment, a most worthy comment, which I want to read. She says, BWIA before, now CAL, started to look at Diwali and Diwali Nagar as a filler outside of the carnival season and Christmas seasons. I raised this as another nexus of cultural tourism, but which can be delivered. But moreover, I just learned that persons in Belize were also interested in TNT's Nagar. So it's a comment. I know the Diwali Nagar, for obvious reasons, is not taking place this year. I think there's a virtual event of some sort, and we must all endorse that. We'll bring on Joe. We have Joe on. While we getting Joe up, I just want, we have the media. We want to thank the media again for being with us. Joe, just hold a second. Just to say that this seminar, among many, many points, and there's several points worthy of being repeated, would be on social media. Tremendous number of valuable contributions. One of the points made by, I think, all the panelists is a tribute to Sprangalang, a national icon. I don't think there's anybody could say anything ill about him, and we've lost a tremendous stalwart. Joe, I'm sure you are also a fan of Sprangalang. Let's hear your question.
This is a simple question for Dr. Alan Sami. What I want to find out, if property tax were to come into existence, the revenue accruing from property tax, will this money, revenue given to the different corporations to look after their corporations? Thank you.
Thank you. In the proposed reform, we were advised that the residential component of the property tax would go towards the municipalities, but that's the only place it reached. So we don't know what is in the proposal. I suppose we will know sometime next week. If that, the only problem with that is, as it is now, you don't have enough to run your corporation. And what government will normally do, if, for example, you were able to generate 2 million in property tax that would go to penal DB, then what they will do is they will take out 2 million out of your revenue, your allocation, so you are left at the zero position that you have gained nothing for investment purposes.
Dr. Sami, more things change. More to remain the same. Well, we could go on. We have a number of questions, but we've had a long afternoon, so we've got to bring it to an end. As we come to an end, we want to thank our large audience, which has been spread throughout Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, North America, and they're on Zoom and on Facebook. We just wish to tell you that we would have excerpts of this again on social media, so you could hear the discourse of any one of our presenters. And they're all worthy of tremendous research. As we go, before I get to the panelists, the support staff has been tremendously efficient as always, led by Shamaine. Thank you all very much. We thank William Archie, who is a tremendous stalwart in social media, quietly efficient as always, Alderman Keevan Gibbs, and the panelists. We thank them all experts in the various fields. Dr. Alan Sami, thank you, sir, an expert on local government and on cricket and many other things. And in my other incarnation in the media, when the floods come up and I interview him on media, he says to us all the time that I've put forward all these proposals that have not been taken into account. We thank very much former Senator Tahaka Obika, one of the bright young economic minds in Trinidad and Tobago, and someone, as they say in the sporting world, keep your eyes on. Extremely bright, extremely talented, very incisive, and we thank you very much, Senator Obika. Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, the legend himself, it is always a tremendous honor. I say it publicly all the time. He's one of my mentors. I've learned immensely from him. He is one of the Caribbean treasures. We're talking about Sprang Alang and others, but Dr. Tim Gopi Singh has made an immense contribution to the Caribbean, the quality of life in the Caribbean, especially in the medical field and in education. He was a transformative Minister of Education, and his works will continue to impact generations to come. Our host, Dr. Rodal Munilal, won for hosting this event, which was quite an educational, most stimulated event, for participating in it. We thank you very much, and on behalf of Dr. Munilal himself, we thank all of you for participating. We've had a very large audience, a more significant audience. We thank you all very much. Now we keep our eyes focused on the budget presentation on Monday, and you can look forward in the traditional and social media, these panelists and others commenting on the issues of the day. We urge you to participate, to take part in the national narrative, express your views. In fact, on these social media, when they're posted, express your views on this. So again, I think we've covered all the grounds here. Thank you all very much for being in our audience. We are very grateful. We hope to do some of this sometime again soon. We urge you to be safe as we go. As Dr. Gopi Singh would want us to remind you, adhere to all the hygienic measures with respect to COVID-19. That is the surest and best way to beat this pandemic. And as what's happening in the US is proving, no one is immune from this. Please do all that we can. Thank you all very much again for being with us, and best wishes.